Chapter 1396. When Sima Quan heard what Xue Dingyuan said, he nodded and said, Sect Master Xue is right. When I was with Sanren Rao, I heard him say that Yang Chuan is more than enough to defend but not enough to advance. He is narrow-minded, overly selfish, and has no guts. He is always afraid of Kong Yin and always ridicules him behind his back. When he is in charge, he always ignores the sects that he is on good terms with when they ask for help. If we follow Spiritual Master Zhang's suggestion and go straight for the Jade Bridge, I'm afraid the Qi Accumulation Palace will be happy to watch from the sidelines. His understanding of the Junqian world was deeper than everyone else present. His words had explained the pros and cons, and his reasoning was convincing enough. Meng Zhide and Ing Chunqiu nodded their heads. Sect Master Qin saw that no one objected and said, since there are no objections, then the first place I will go is Yuliangism. Yu Xianxiao said, then the next problem is how to conceal the commotion of breaking through the realm. Although they had decided on the place to attack, it didn't mean that everything was ready. There were still a few difficulties to overcome. The first was that breaking through the heaven and earth pass would cause a huge commotion. The more powerful the person was, the more it would cause a commotion. Perhaps it would only take an instant for the people from the outer realm to break through the heaven and earth pass, but it was different for the people in the inner realm. They would have sensed it years, decades, or even decades in advance. When the Kun brought the sects from the 9 continents to the mountain and sea realm, some of the more powerful people in the inner realm sensed it more than 100 years ago. Because of this, once the cultivators of the Junqian realm sensed an enemy from the outer realm, no matter how far away they would have enough time to react. Sect Master Qin said, since Hall Master Duzhen proposed this plan, I have been thinking about it. Now, there are 3 things that can be used. He waved his horsetail whisk and 3 boys walked into the hall. Each of them held a jade plate in their hands, and there were 3 items placed on top of it. Meng Zhide bowed and said, Teacher, please explain to the spiritual masters on behalf of your disciple. Then, he looked at the jade plates. There was a flash of divine light in the hall, and the restrictions on the 3 jade plates were removed. A boy removed the cloth covering the first jade plate, and 16 pieces of beautiful jade appeared. Meng Zhide said, last time, Temple Lord Duzhen discovered a ruined palace in the western wastelands. It was left behind 100,000 years ago by a Taoist sect called the Golden One School. Later on, in the north, east, and south, 3 places, we discovered the sect's forbidden palaces one after another. Moreover, every place had a technique that concealed our senses. After further investigation, we discovered that it was because of the Golden One statue that they worshipped. This object was carved from a type of demon bone, and then refined with a secret external medicine. I took 10 of its wings and made 8 pairs of these jade amulets to hide the Junqian world cultivators from sensing us. Yu Xianxiao said, although it is useful, it is not safe to use it alone. Meng Zhide said, Sect Leader Yu, please wait a moment. At his signal, the cloth covering the second jade plate was removed, and there were many talismans on it. He pointed and said, this is the talisman that teacher made. If we carry it with us, we can suppress our aura, just like the elephant realm cultivators. When we break through the realm, we won't cause too much of a commotion. The Golden One School could be said to have obtained the demon bone by accident. They didn't have such an item before, so they were prepared to use these talismans as a cover. When Sima Quan broke through the realm, it was difficult to discover him. That was because his cultivation level was low, and he hadn't recovered his vitality, so his aura was only comparable to that of ordinary Heaven's Abode cultivators. That was why it was difficult for the Junqian world to detect him. They suppressed their aura, and with the demon bone on them, they could successfully avoid detection. At this time, the cloth covering the 3rd jade plate was removed, and there was half a bowl of water on it. It was only a shallow layer, but it gave off a bottomless feeling. Meng Zhide said, the 3rd item is a gift from the Ling sect. I'll have to ask Sect Master Xue to explain the details. Xue Dingyuan bowed and said, esteemed masters, this item is made from the water of the Styx River, the treasure of the Styx sect. You only need to take a drop and send it into the Junchen world with the dual realm dial, and you can pollute a planet. Then, you can transfer the polluted soil out and refine it into a talisman. We can wear it on our bodies to reduce the commotion of our breaking through the realm to the lowest. The reason why mortal metamorphosis cultivators had such a great impact on breaking through the gate of heaven and earth was not only because of their cultivation, but also because they had found their roots and fruits long ago, so they could be considered to have formed their own world. If they broke into another world, it would naturally cause a great commotion. Using the water of the Styx River to pollute the soil of the world and then taking it back to refine it into a talisman to conceal their tracks was not something that Xue Dingyuan had thought of. It was a method of invading the realm passed down by ancestor Ling Yu of the Styx sect. However, it was extremely rare for the younger generation to cultivate to mortal metamorphosis, and they had never conquered the outer space of the world, so they had no use for this method. Of course, all of these methods might not be reliable. If the Junchen world was like the sects of the 9 continents and had built the vast land domain formation, then no matter how they prepared, it would be useless. The moment they tried to break through the realm, they would immediately be noticed by the people of the inner realm. However, the Junchen world was a place that was about to be abandoned, so there was almost no defense. From this point of view, the cultivators of the 9 continents should take the initiative to attack. Yu Xuanxiao's eyes lit up, and he said, "Good. With these 3 items, this trip is already half done." Sect Master Qin looked at Sima Quan and said politely, "There are 2 more things that I have to entrust to esteemed Master Sima." Sima Quan bowed and said, "I don't dare. If Sect Master Qin has any instructions, just tell me." Sect Master Qin said, "We need someone in the inner realm to guide us through the heaven and earth door. Only then can we land where we need to land. This will require the assistance of the Sky Gui, esteemed." After a break world cultivator went through the heaven and earth door, it was not up to them to decide which sky they would land in. To solve this, they needed someone with the Sky Gui to lie in ambush in the land of Yuliangism. That way, outsiders could land next to them. Sima Quan thought about it and said, "Sima can do this." This was very dangerous. If he was not careful, he would be discovered by the people of the sect. He had the body of a sky demon. Even if he was exposed, he would just lose a body. The difficulty was how to hide there and not ruin the plan. Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "Aside from this, there is one more thing." He waved his horsetail whisk and showed the sky map of Junchen realm. "Esteemed Sima presented this map to me. I saw that Yuliangism relies on 6 formations to communicate with the outside world. Can esteemed destroy them first?" The planets of Junchen realm were very far apart. The more powerful a sect was, the more sky they occupied. Usually, when they traveled, they could only rely on formations to escape. As long as the formation Dao was destroyed, they would be able to cut off contact with each other. Even if Yang Chuan acted out of character and wanted to rescue them, he would not be able to arrive in a short period of time. This way, they would be able to buy enough time for them to encircle and annihilate Yuliang cult. Sima Quan muttered to himself irresolutely for a moment before replying, "It is not difficult for me to obtain the formation Dao. Although there are restrictions in this place, no one would dare to destroy it. However, with my abilities, even if I were to destroy a section of the formation Dao, it would not be difficult for the 2 clans to repair it as long as there are formation masters present. Unless the formation Dao is destroyed in one fell swoop, that is not something that I can do." Sect Master Qin smiled and said, "Sect Master Yu, I wonder if the item you speak of has been refined?" Yu Xianxiao said, "Naturally, it has been prepared." As he said this, a bright spiritual light flew out and landed on the table. Everyone looked and saw that it was 6 sword pellets that shone with cold light and flowed with jade. Yu Xianxiao said in a clear voice, "Every sword pellet here contains a strand of my divine will. Later, I will use the dual realm dial to send the water of the river Styx and these items to Junchen realm. Esteemed Sima only needs to bury them beside the 6 formations. When the time comes, you only need to activate it and you will be able to destroy them all." Sima Quan saw this and immediately said, "With the help of such a magic artifact, if I still cannot accomplish this, I will not have the face to see everyone again. Zhang Yan watched from the side and nodded to himself. In order to kill their way into the Junqian realm, the sects had already made many perfect preparations. After all, these 100 years had not been in vain. This time, they had used the first move to attack the unprepared. If they could succeed in everything they had planned, then just as Yu Xianxiao said, they already had a 50% chance of victory. While the sects were discussing, on the land of the mountain and sea realm, the forces of the various regions were also making their preparations in an orderly manner. In Boda City, Gong Xian Zhao flipped the bamboo stick in his hand and said, "It should be these people. When fellow Taoists of the 9 continents return, we will send them to the outer world to hide." A Gong clan elder said with some reluctance, "Jiyu, are we really going to send those people? These people are the elites of the younger generation of our Gong clan. If the cultivators of the Junqian realm come and 9 continents are defeated, then we will be trapped in the evil realm. If we want to recover, it will take at least another 100 years." Gong Xian Zhao raised his head and looked at him coldly. He said, "If fellow Taoists of the 9 continents are defeated, as allies, do you think we will be able to stay out of this?" The sect elder muttered, "Since the 2 high priestesses already have emperor titles in the Junqian realm, you are still rulers of a region. If you return to the mountain and sea realm, considering that we are of the same bloodline, I believe you won't make things too difficult for us, right?" Gong Xian Zhao stared at him for a moment, then looked at another elder and said, "Sect elder also thinks so?" The elder coughed and said, "Jiyu, don't be angry. Elder Xian is not being selfish. He is also thinking for the sake of our Gong clan." Gong Xian Zhao said coldly, "If not for that, I would have killed him just now." When the sect elder heard that, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat and didn't dare to say another word. Gong Xian Zhao took a deep breath and said, "There is not a single Purple Sun Realm cultivator in the 100 kingdoms. We won't be of much help in this battle. Sending our clansmen over is to show our fellow Taoists of the 9 continents that we are in the same boat. Also, it is to preserve a spark for our Gong clan. If we die, we can continue to offer sacrifices in the future." The elder was shocked and said, "Jiyu, what do you mean by this?" "What do I mean?" Gong Xian Zhao snorted and said, "If the Junqian realm wins, they won't do anything to the Gong clan. After all, compared to outsiders, the Gong clan can be considered to be of the same origin. But those are ordinary clansmen. If we join them, we won't have a good ending." The sect elder didn't understand and said, "Why? With the cultivation of the 2 great priests, could it be that they can't tolerate us? Or do they not need us to control our clansmen?" Gong Xian Zhao said mockingly, "Gong Shao and Gong Cheng naturally don't care about us, but these 2 have been in the Junqian realm for 7,000 years and have descendants. If these people want to take over the entire Gong clan, how can they tolerate us?" Both of their expressions changed as they immediately understood what was going on. After a while, the elder stood up and said seriously, "Jiyu, do what you want to do. The clan will definitely support you fully." Chapter 1397. Several months later, Dermic boats and cloud rafts flew out from all over the mountain and sea realm, all heading towards the heaven-patching array. The various forces had been invited by the Mingcang and Shaoqing sects to send their disciples or clansmen's children to the evil realm. Only when the outcome of the battle was decided would they bring them back. Naturally, there were many people in the 4 territories, and not all of them could go. Therefore, only the elites who were carefully selected from the various factions could go there. Because the evil realm was not big and there was not enough spiritual opportunity, each sect had a limit on the number of people who could go there. If the cultivators of Great Dust World came, these disciples could clearly avoid this calamity. However, this was not an advantage. If they lost this battle, they would have to bear the heavy responsibility of reviving their sects and even their tribes. Not only that, because the evil realm was not a good place to go. In the Void Essence Sea, there was the innate chaotic destruction vitality light. If they went there once, they might not be able to come back. This was enough to be called a test of life and death. As for why they did not wait until the battle was over, it was because the situation was really irreversible. No one could guarantee that they would be able to send the news back. In the sky, a flying ship was heading north. It was sent by the Blue Feather Pavilion, and there were more than 100 disciples on the ship. Normally, the Blue Feather Pavilion did not have a heaven's abode in charge, so they could only send 60 people. However, because it was a lower sect of the Qinsang school, and the sect master Han Xiaoda was Han Zuoqing's son, the Qinsang school allowed them to send so many people. After flying for 3 months, 2 disciples walked out of the cabin. Looking down at the sea of clouds and mountains that were constantly moving backward, they unconsciously felt relieved, sweeping away the stuffiness in their chests. A young disciple complained, "Senior brother, at this rate, it will take at least 3 years to reach the Dragon Abyss Sea. If we could use the Cloud Whale, we would be there in an instant. Why do we need to go through so much trouble?" Another slightly older disciple seemed to be very calm. He said, "Our Bu Pavilion only has 1 Cloud Whale, and we are so far away from the upper sect. We will only use the Cloud Whale when there is an emergency. Junior brother Qiao, if you want to use it, then wait until the state of Yuanying." Junior martial brother Qiao's face fell and he muttered, "Even the sect master has only reached this realm. Senior martial brother thinks too highly of me." However, a moment later, he rolled his eyes and moved closer, asking in a low voice, "Senior brother, do you know where we are going?" The senior disciple shook his head and said, "I've asked master, and he said that he doesn't know either. However, there will be arrangements when we arrive at the upper sect. I'll know when the time comes." For the sake of caution, among the various forces, only the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven or the clan masters who signed the contract knew that the few spiritual masters Fan Tu would attack the Junqian world on their own, and not stay in the world to face the attack. Therefore, these disciples didn't know that they were going to the evil world. They only knew that the sect would send them to a world to train for the upcoming competition. As the 2 disciples were talking, they saw a huge creature appear in the clouds in front of them. It was 10,000 feet long, and the sky was covered by its huge figure. On both sides of its back, relying on the blood-red dorsal fins, there were several palaces built. It could be seen that there were more than 1,000 fierce demons that looked like flood dragons swimming around it, and there were muffled roars coming from them from time to time. Junior martial brother Qiao pointed and exclaimed, "Senior martial brother, look, what is that?" The senior disciple took a look and said angrily, "Don't make a fuss. That is the Imperial Canal Dharma carriage of the Bull Dragon tribe of the 100 South Sea continent. Its purpose for coming here is probably the same as ours." Junior martial brother Qiao asked curiously, "Shouldn't the demon tribe of the 100 South Sea continent go by the sea? Why would it come from here?" The senior disciple said, "That was in the past. Now that the 4 regions are all allies, going straight from the South Sea continent to the north is of course much faster than going around the sea. It's just that the natural moat on the way is slightly harder to cross." Junior martial brother Qiao was a little more expectant, and said excitedly, "I heard that the Bull Dragon tribe has many talented tribesmen who were in the limelight in the previous competition. This little brother will have the chance to ask them for guidance." On the Imperial Canal Dharma carriage, Lu Xiujiao and Lu Yin also saw the Jade Feather Pavilion's flying ship in the distance. Recently, there were more and more spiritual ships heading to the north. On the way from the 100 South Sea continent, they had already met more than 100 spiritual ships. Lu Yin looked very worried at this moment. The Bull Dragon tribe was born with strong physique, but this also became a shackle that restrained them. Except for some young flood dragons whose qi and blood hadn't solidified, the great demons that had cultivated for more than 1,000 years couldn't leave this world. This time, there were only about 30 tribesmen that could be sent away. He sighed and said, "The war between the 2 worlds is right around the corner. I heard that the cultivators of Junqian world are stronger than mine. What if we lose?" His worry was not without reason. The Ox Flood Dragon Demon ancestor Lu Hun had signed a contract. Even if the cultivators of the 9 continents could not resist, they had to fight to the end. There was no way out. Lu Xiujiao was silent for a moment, then said, Chu Jiao heard from true monarch Gua that the demonic cultivators in the Junchen realm have been squeezed out to the point where there aren't many forces left. Only a few tribes are left, struggling at death's door. That's because the Junchen realm is large enough. If they occupied the mountain and sea realm, would there be any place for me to hide? I hope we can win this battle. Otherwise, the future of our tribe can only depend on the clansmen behind us who haven't grown up yet. The wastelands of the mountain and sea realm were very far away from the dragon abyss. The great rock, Ingui, floated high up in the sky, the imperial palace on his back. In the main hall, all the reverend mortal metamorphoses of the 9 continents, including Zhang Yan, were standing there. After several months of preparation, today was the day to leave for the Junchen realm. In order to prevent the world from becoming chaotic and causing unnecessary panic, only a few people knew about today's trip. Everyone's faces were solemn. Even though they had planned meticulously before, they could not be sure how far they would go when the time came. Outside the imperial palace, sect leader Qin was talking to Qin Yu and Shen Baishuang. He said, when you return, open the earth vast formation. If anyone from the outside world invades, we will be able to detect it in time. If I do not return from this battle, the position of sect leader will be taken over by Yuntian. I hope the 3 of you can help him and protect our Qinsang orthodoxy. The 2 of them cupped their heads and said, we dare not disappoint the Reverend sect leader. Below the sect leader, apart from Reverend Du and Reverend Han, as well as Mu Shoshan, who was about to reincarnate, the 2 of them were the most senior people in Qinsang school. With the 3 of them supporting him, and the full support of the Du Zhen and Daylight Halls, Qi Yuntian would be able to support the sect and intimidate everyone. After sect leader Qin finished giving them instructions, he waved his horsetail whisk and said, you can go now. The 2 of them bowed again and left on the conveyance light. Sect leader Qin watched them leave, then returned to the main hall. Yu Xianshao looked over and asked, fellow Taoist Qin, are you done? Sect leader Qin said, sorry to keep you waiting. Yu Xianshao laughed. Then let's go. Just now, Shen Baishuang and Qin Yu had not gone far when they felt a huge tremor coming from behind them. They looked back and saw a clear light rising. In the light screen, a large kun flew across the sky and knocked open the heaven and earth gate. However, in an instant, it closed again, leaving only an endless empty space. Shen Baishuang said, I only hope that senior brother sect leader and the Duzhen Hall master can come back safely. Qin Yu's expression was slightly complicated. She said, junior brother, let's go back. According to senior brother sect leader's instructions, there are still many things that we need to do. Shen Baishuang nodded. The 2 of them held a hand seal, and in an instant, 2 clear lights turned into rainbows and flew away. Junchen Realm, Cold Core Heavenly Region. Sima Quan stood on a large ship and looked down with his hands behind his back. In order to destroy the 6 formations of Yuliangism, he was now in the hinterland of the sect. Outside the Earth Star, there were constantly flying ships piercing through the cloud barrier and descending. However, when they passed by Sima Quan's carriage, they took the initiative to give way. They either stayed far away or followed behind him, not daring to keep pace with him. At this moment, his identity was no longer that Taoist Quan Ming, but the perfected lord who surnamed in charge of a heavenly region under Yuliangism. Yuliangism was the place where his doppelgangers had infiltrated the least. In order to be restricted by the rules of the sect, there were especially many disciples who swallowed the knowledge jade. This also caused his devil qi to invade, and it was possible for him to be discovered. Fortunately, after reaching the level of perfected lords, even if they surrendered to the sect, there were only a small number of people who were willing to swallow the knowledge jade. The only troublesome thing was that almost all of his actions were restricted by the sect rules. Every day, the amount of external medicine he used, the number of hours he could travel, what kind of training he should use, and how far he could travel in a day were all fixed rules. Fortunately, as a sky devil, even if he did not have a physical body, he could still travel invisibly. Otherwise, he would not be able to move an inch. These days, he went out to explore every day, looking for a suitable place to bury the sword pill. Only when he felt that his devil body was weak did he return to his body and swallow the impure spiritual vigor to replenish his consumption. This effort did not go to waste. Yesterday, he finally found a convenient place to start. However, he also noticed that recently, there were more and more movements from all directions. Most of the cultivators were unscrupulously collecting external medicine, as if they wanted to bring as much as they could from this world as possible before the expedition. At this moment, a disciple behind him came up and said softly, "Perfected Lord, if we go any further, it will be the formation viewing area. Should we leave?" Sima Quan said, "There is nothing else here, it is time to go." Following his instruction, the spirit boat did not stop and headed towards the formation that traversed the void. When the person in charge of guarding saw that it was a perfected lord, he immediately gave way and released the layers of restrictions, allowing him to pass through. Sima Quan narrowed his eyes. Just as the spirit boat passed through the formation, he lightly waved his sleeves, and an indiscernible ray of light fell down. No one saw this action, and in fact, no one dared to look at a perfected lord carelessly. After smoothly passing through the formation path, he sensed for a while and found that even though he was so far away, he could still sense the location of the sword pellet. As long as he used his consciousness, he could trigger the power contained within it. He looked around and gave a deep smile, saying, "It's time to go to the next boundary." Chapter 1398. In the depths of the heaven region, a Taoist was riding on a green demonic bird, harvesting the spiritual vigor of the purple clear world. This person was one of the 4 imperial monarchs of the Jade Liang cult, Bei Xiangtong, a Taoist who had ascended from the smoke domain. This person had a leisurely expression, but the moment Sima Quan threw down the sword pellet, he suddenly paused. The demon bird felt something was wrong and asked in surprise, "Lord, what's wrong?" Bei Xiangtong frowned slightly and looked into the distant sky. Just now, he felt an inexplicable palpitation. Based on his past experience, something bad must have happened, and it might even be related to him. Could it be that after he left, something happened in the heaven domain under his rule? He thought for a while and then shook his head. A few years ago, Kang Ying had issued an order for everyone in the sect to prepare to attack the blue sky domain. He heard that the cultivators of the 9 continents were not to be trifled with. As a Taoist cultivator from the lower domain, his skills were inferior to cultivators like Jun Chen. Facing such a powerful enemy, he had to seize every opportunity to collect purple qi to make up for his shortcomings. Now that he had pure spiritual vigor in the depths of the void, if he rushed back now, even if he could use the formation Tao, it would take at least 10 years to go back and forth. He didn't want to waste time here, so he thought to himself, if something really happens in the heaven domain, they will send a message here. I'll just think of a way then. After thinking about it, he put the matter behind him and continued to use his mana to collect pure spiritual vigor. Somewhere in the wild heaven domain, tens of thousands of spiritual boats and palaces were arranged majestically, flying across the sky above the barren stars. In the largest palace, Emperor Qi Gongchang was sitting on a golden platform. Because he cultivated the Qi and Blood Tao in his early years, and he really attached importance to the art of internal strengthening, his body was huge, almost twice the size of an ordinary person. He sat on a high place, and when he came and went from below, he was like a small mountain, giving off a strong sense of oppression. On the table in front of him, there was a head. If Sima Quan was here, he would recognize that it was the head of true Lord Deng. Gong Chang glanced at it casually and asked the head, "Is this the place where you said the jade pot is hiding?" The head nodded. Gong Chang asked a few more questions, but the head was able to answer a few simple words at first, but after a while, its eyelids drooped and it was completely silent. When he saw this, he waved his hand and said, "Take it down and replenish some spiritual vigor. I still have questions to ask when I come down, don't let it spoil." The attendant at the side acknowledged, picked up the head, placed it in a jade box, and retreated out. Gong Chang said, "What a pity. If I had captured Deng's Dharmakaya instead of just his physical body, I would have been able to get more clues with my art of Zhuliang." A cultivator dressed in a red Taoist robe stood up and cupped his fists. "My lord, this disciple is incompetent. I failed to capture this person and present him to you. At this moment, a Taoist stood up and spoke for him. My lord, don't blame junior apprentice brother. Deng's supernatural power is strange and unpredictable, and he even had the art of sacrificing himself to escape. It's not easy for him to keep his head. Gong Chang said, I don't blame you, it's just a pity. I heard that there was a Taoist Quan Ming beside Rao Sanren. Have you looked for him? The Taoist bowed and replied, this person's whereabouts are strange and unpredictable. He might even have supernatural power to change and hide. It's hard for us to find him. Gong Chang touched the short mustache on his chin and said, maybe this person knows more. But since we're here, let's not bother about him for now. Let's find the jade pot that's hiding here. The disciples acknowledged and went down to supervise the other disciples to search this heaven domain carefully. However, what no one expected was that this search would take more than 10 years. Even after such a long period of time, there was nothing to be gained. It was inevitable that everyone's morale would be dampened. One day, a disciple suggested, my lord, this is such a big place. It's difficult to find a jade pot. Some of our disciples are already exhausted. Why don't we retreat for now? Gong Xiao's expression was firm. Emperor Cheng's life mirror hasn't shattered, so he's not dead yet. I must find him. The disciple tried to persuade him, I heard that the prosperous emperor and the emperor have been harvesting the pure spirits in the void sky all these years. With this, when they fight against the cultivators of the 9 continents, they might be able to suppress you. Gong Xiao said, how could I not know this? But Emperor Cheng and I are bound together. If he can't be freed, I won't have a good time in Yuliangism. Gong Xiao and he were of the same race and ascended together. Not to mention that their skills were similar, they had been helping each other for more than 10,000 years. No one could live without the other. If he really died here, he would be left alone to face Kong Yin. By then, he would not be as confident as he was before. There was another point that could not be made clear. In the Bohuan Tian domain that Gong Xiao had originally occupied, there were 7,000 years of purple pure lingqi and many external medicines. If they had not appeared before the expedition, then he was sure that the cult would find a way to take them away. How could he be willing to do that? Hearing his words, the disciples knew that it would be difficult for them to return. They could only increase their efforts in searching. Soon, another 3 years had passed. Perhaps it was time. One day, when a disciple was looking around, he inadvertently saw a white jade pot floating outside. It seemed to have a spirit. The moment it appeared in front of people, it jumped into the void and disappeared. The disciple panicked. He pointed and shouted, "My lord!" Gong Xiao examined it for a moment and snorted. In the next moment, his body also disappeared from the carriage. When he reappeared, he was already back on his seat, but there was a jade pot in his hand. However, it kept jumping as if it wanted to escape. His eyes lit up. He said happily, "I finally found it." He looked up and said loudly, "There's no need to stay here anymore. Send my orders. Get everyone to return to the Yang Heaven Domain. Morning Luster Heaven Domain, observing the Earth Star." Sima Quan sat on a rock, looking coldly at a streak of light streaking across the sky. In his eyes, the great dust world was full of spiritual opportunity and flourishing. Looking at all the heavens, the number of cultivators was 1,000 times more than the cultivators of the 9 continents. It was on the rise. If there was no threat from the true Yang Almighty, they would not have abandoned this place and sought for another world. However, the mountain and sea realm was already occupied by the cultivators of the 9 continents. As one of them, he could not let them have their way. He looked up into the sky. There, a colorful light rose up from the ground and shot into the depths of the void. After more than 10 years, he had set up 5 Tao formations. The one in front of him was the last one. After this was done, he would send a clone to bring the sky-piercing Gui to a suitable location. When the 9 continents supremes arrived, it would be a success. However, when he arrived a month ago, he found that things were a little tricky. This was originally where the Chang Emperor, Guzongrong, was stationed. Although this person had gone beyond the heavens to collect spiritual opportunity more than a decade ago, because the formation path here was connected to more than a dozen heavenly regions, it could be said to be the most important of the 6 formation paths. The security here was unimaginably tight. There were 3 true monarchs guarding this place all year round. It was extraordinarily difficult to do anything under their watch. Even if he used his devil chi to invade them, he might not succeed. That was because the 3 of them had most likely swallowed the jade of knowledge before. If anything happened inside their bodies, it was very likely that it would attract Kong Yin's attention. He did not dare to do that. Not only that, but every 3 years, a Dao formation master would come to repair it. That meant that even if he did bury the sword sphere, it would be found. If possible, he would rather wait for an opportunity. However, he couldn't stay here for long. After pondering for a while, he came up with a plan. The person guarding the Dao formations hadn't changed for more than 100 years. Since he couldn't use devil chi to invade his body, he might as well find a way to replace him. If the replacement didn't consume jade of knowledge, then he would have a chance. After all, most supremes didn't consume jade of knowledge. As for how to do it, it was easy. Everyone had disciples, and if something happened in the sect, it wouldn't be difficult to lure them away. In order to ensure success, he didn't just target one person. He targeted the disciples of the 2 supremes. A few days ago, he received news that one of the supremes had resigned from his post and left in a hurry. Now, he only needed to find out who would take over the position, then he could target him. Just as he was waiting for the result, he saw a ray of light descending from the sky. Then, a talisman floated down. This was obviously the talisman of the sect. His eyes flashed and he took it. When he opened it, he revealed a strange expression. The talisman told him that perfected Ing Han, who was guarding the Dao formations, had something to do with her clan. She noticed that he was passing by and ordered him to guard the place for 3 months. The sect would remember his merit and his original position could be postponed. Sima Quan didn't expect that the other party would look for him. However, after thinking about it, he understood. The Supremes guarding the Earth Star had their own duties and couldn't leave without permission. Therefore, he could only look for people from other places. Now that there was a shortage of manpower everywhere, it would take a long time to get someone from other places. Therefore, it was unquestionably the most suitable choice. It was very likely that Ing Han had left after knowing that there was someone like him. He put away the decree and chuckled. This was an unexpected surprise. Although it was only 3 months, if Ing Han died on the way back, he would be able to keep his position. There was no time to lose. Just as he was about to soar into the sky, however, at this moment, he felt a ripple of spiritual aura from the Tongtian Gui that was hidden in his sleeve. After a while, it shook again and disappeared. After this happened 3 times, there was no more sound. He was shocked and couldn't help but look towards the sky. This was the message that the Supremes of the sects had agreed on with him. With this movement, it meant that they had arrived. Outside the heaven and earth gate of Junqin realm, a huge Kun was floating in the void primordial sea. Zhang Yan and a few venerable mortal metamorphoses were looking down quietly. They were waiting for a suitable opportunity. Once Sima Quan activated the sky-piercing Gui, they would immediately break through the heaven and earth gate and kill their way into Junqin realm. Chapter 1399. Sima Quan didn't immediately send a reply. He knew that even if he activated the sky-piercing Gui, the cultivators of the 9 continents wouldn't be able to enter at once. No matter how fast they were, it would take several years to get through. Even if it took a bit longer, it would still be normal. Even though the cultivators of the 9 continents had used many methods to hide their auras to prevent the cultivators of the inner realm from sensing them, it was hard to say. If someone found them, they could still prepare in advance. In this case, it was very important to destroy the 6 formations. As long as he succeeded, even if the 2 sects noticed an enemy coming, they wouldn't be able to gather their forces in a short period of time. This would give the 9 continents time to split up and destroy the formations. He waved his hand and called a disciple to come up. He handed the sky-piercing gué to that disciple. This disciple had also been infected by his demonic poison. Once the time was right, he only needed to give the order and that disciple would activate the treasure for him. After inspecting his body and confirming that there weren't any flaws, he transformed into a ray of clear light that soared into the sky and dashed up into the sky. Just one day later, he gradually closed in on the formation. He looked over and found that a lot of formations were on the side. From the outside, they all looked like rainbows. Under the vast void, they looked very beautiful. He had the decree with him, so along the way, the restrictions were all separated without any obstruction. At the end, he saw a bridge of gold and bronze with 2 cultivators standing on it. He had already found out that one of them was named Kai and the other was named Zhu. They were both guards of the formation and were at the first stage of the elephant realm. However, they knew that they had no hope of cultivating, so they joined Yuliangism and took the initiative to devour the knowledge jade. This earned them Gu Songrong's trust. When Kai and Zhu heard that there would be a guard today, they were already waiting there out of courtesy. Sima Quan knew that if he wanted to do things smoothly in the next few days, he would have to deal with these 2, so he rushed forward. He clasped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow cultivators." The 2 of them returned the greeting. Because the journey to the formation path was extremely long, they still had their duties to do. After greeting each other and roughly explaining the rules of this place, they went their separate ways. Sima Quan went to the formation he was supposed to look after. He patrolled the area and familiarized himself with it before sitting down on the floating platform. He didn't immediately bury the sword ball. Although he didn't feel anything strange, he was sure that someone was watching him. It wasn't that the sect suspected him of being an enemy, but that he hadn't devoured the knowledge jade, so he wasn't trustworthy. If it wasn't for the fact that they were short on manpower, they wouldn't have sent him here. Therefore, for a period of time after that, other than patrolling the array Dao, he meditated and did not do anything else. He was secretly waiting for an opportunity. After 3 months in a row, he and Kai and Zhu, 2 people could be considered to be familiar with each other. One day when Zhu Zhenjuan was chatting with him, he said, "Zhenjuan, I'm afraid you'll have to stay here for a while." Sima Quan already knew the reason, but he pretended to be surprised. "Why is that?" Zhu sighed. "I don't know what happened to True Lording. He had already taken care of the clan's matters, but on the way back, we lost contact with him. We don't know where he is now. Before he returns, we can only trouble True Lord Hu to continue looking after the formation." Sima Quan sighed and smiled bitterly. "I only hope that True Lording will return soon." Zhu looked at him and asked, "What do you think of this place, True Lord?" Sima Quan said, "Other than looking after the formation every day being a little troublesome, there's nothing bad about it. At least we can use external medicine as we wish, and we get along quite well." Zhu laughed. "If True Lord Hu is willing to suffer some grievances, it's not difficult for you to stay here." Sima Quan understood that this was to persuade him to devour the knowledge jade. That way, he would be truly trusted, and he would be able to stay here. But as a heavenly demon, how would he dare to do that? Luckily, True Lord Ying's life and death were still unknown. At least before the results were found, he could still sit firmly in his position. He said, "I will think about it carefully." Zhu laughed. He didn't try to persuade him any further, and left. Another 3 months passed quickly, but Inghan still hadn't returned. At this time, the sect realized that something was wrong. They sent people to search, but to no avail. They concluded that something unexpected must have happened. Right now, the various heaven domain spiritual masters all had their own duties, and they couldn't find suitable people. After some consideration, because Sima Quan hadn't made any mistakes in the past half a year, they might as well appoint him as the guardian of this place, and he could be considered to have obtained the position. After Sima Quan heard this news, he was completely at ease. In reality, he had been paying attention to this matter. Even if someone really came to take over his position, he would think of a way to get rid of him without leaving a trace. Now that he could take over, it saved him a lot of trouble. On the second day after he was appointed, he threw down the last sword orb. At the same time, he secretly sent a message to the clone, ordering him to turn the sky-reaching Gui. But he couldn't leave yet. It would take some time for the 9-continent Jinren to pass through the Heaven and Earth Pass. He could only activate the 6 sword orbs at the same time. In the void primordial sea, the 6 mortal slew Jinren that came from the 9-continent were sitting cross-legged on the back of the giant Kuan. Even though there were rays of innate chaotic destructive primordial light that kept falling on them, as mortal slew cultivators, they didn't care at all. Zhang Yan suddenly sensed something. He opened his eyes and took out the sky-reaching Gui. Looking at the spiritual light that burst out from it, he said, "There's news from Jinren Sima." Sect Master Qin said slowly, "According to the previous plan, if Jinren Sima's plan goes smoothly, then we will land in the territory of junior martial brother Kongying, Gu Songrong. Jinren, if you see this person, you must kill him at the first moment. Don't let him escape." In attacking Yuliangism, who to target first was also very important. The 2 Gong brothers and Bei Xiangtong were originally subdued by Yuliangism. Even if they were killed, it wouldn't change the overall situation. But other than Kongying, the most important person in the sect was Gu Songrong. Just like how the heavens needed to communicate with each other through formations, Gu Songrong was the hub of communication between the upper and lower levels of Yuliangism. Kongying usually didn't care about the mundane affairs. He only fought everywhere and deterred enemies. Gu Songrong, on the other hand, was in charge of internal and external affairs. He planned the overall situation and was also responsible for passing down orders. The 2 of them worked very well together. Once this person died, the Yuliang order would certainly fall into chaos. Gong Shao and Gong Chang had their own agendas to begin with. Without an order, they would likely find an excuse to shirk their duty. As long as one person watched, the others would likely follow suit. This would be greatly beneficial to their operations. Yu Xianshao stood up and said in a loud voice, "Then there's no need to wait." He turned around and said, "Jinren Zhang, you and I will kill our way in now." If all the Jinren mortals went in together, even if they had a concealment method, it was still very likely that they would be discovered. Therefore, they decided to go first. Yu Xianshao and Zhang Yan's escape techniques were excellent, so they could kill their way into the realm first to find their opponents. Sect leader Qin and the rest would come later. As for the great Kuaning Gui, he was arranged to enter the realm last. Zhang Yan smiled and stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Jinren, Jinren Zhang, we will go first." After he finished speaking, he nodded at Yu Xianshao. Then, the 2 of them turned into 2 majestic beams of clear light and rushed into the Heaven and Earth Pass. In the blink of an eye, 7 years had passed. After Sima Quan became the guard, he patrolled the formation path every day. Sometimes, he even took the initiative to take care of some matters. It seemed like he was doing his duty, but he was actually doing it to prevent the sword ball from being found. On this day, he heard Jinren Zhu's voice transmission. "Jinren Hu, the Lord will return in a few days. You have to be alert. Don't make any mistakes." Sima Quan's expression changed. Gu Songrong is going to return. He thought, if I destroy the formation path the moment Gu Songrong returns, will he be expelled into the void realm and never come out again? But after thinking about it again, he decided not to take this risk. Jinren mortals had remarkable abilities. He might discover something before this and escape in advance. Moreover, even if he succeeded, it would conflict with the original plan. If he fell into the void realm, who knew when he would come out? That would be self-defeating. So, he did everything as usual. After a month, he felt a beam of clear light fly out from the formation path and land on Earth's star. As soon as the aura passed through Tsongtian, he felt as if he was being pressed down by a mountain. He couldn't move his body at all. After a long time, he recovered just now. He couldn't help but think, it seems like the legends are true. Although this person is good at managing the sect, his cultivation isn't high. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been unable to control his aura when he flew over. There was still some time before the expedition to the mountain and sea realm. Gu Tsongrong had returned because he was worried about the affairs of the sect over the past few years. He planned to take care of them before returning to Tsongtian to collect aura. But just as he was about to land on Earth Star, his expression suddenly changed. He seemed to have sensed something. He stopped and looked back. He wasn't the only one. All the cultivators felt something was amiss. They couldn't help but look up into the sky, and expressions of shock appeared on their faces. A gap had been torn in the sky. At the same time, two powerful auras descended. Just now, Gu Tsongrong's aura was like a trickle. These two auras were like raging waves. They were filled with killing intent and caused the entire world to tremble. In the midst of the fear, only Sima Quan revealed a look of joy. He didn't know that 9 provinces true chi was already here. Without hesitation, he activated the 6 sword orbs. Boom! Almost at the same time, 6 swords that could tear the heavens and split the earth rose up in the great dust realm, stirring up the heavens. Chapter 1400. The moment the 6 sword energies rose, the 6 formations that were used to communicate with nearly 100 heavenly regions collapsed at the same time. Not only that, everything that was close to the formations, whether it was the magic boats from the palaces or the cultivators controlling the magic treasures, was instantly turned into ashes. In the Qinzhai heavenly region, the 2 perfected monarchs, Kai and Zhu, were only affected by the sword lights and died instantly. Even their souls could not escape. Under the attack of perfected Fan Tu's mana, they could not resist at all. Sima Quan's corporeal body could not escape this calamity either. However, he was already prepared. Before this, he had already turned his devil body invisible and retreated to Earth Star. At this moment, the cultivators there were all shocked by this unexpected change. Their minds were in a state of confusion, and it was convenient for him to find a suitable corporeal body to occupy. As for what came down, it was not something he could interfere with. As the rainbow that pierced through the sky dissipated, 2 majestic beams of clear light could be seen rushing into the realm from outside the heaven and earth gate. Gu Tsongrong was suspended in the sky, and his expression became unusually solemn. He knew that outsiders had intruded into the realm, but he could not tell where they came from and whether they were friend or foe. Judging from the aura he sensed, the person's skills were far more profound than his. At this moment, the best choice was to escape first. However, there were at least 10 million followers on the Earth Star. As the great protector of the sect, he naturally could not abandon them and leave. He summoned a disciple and instructed, "Pass down my orders. The sect cannot stay on Earth Star any longer. Quickly retreat into the void." Deep in the void of Junqian realm, Yang Chuan was circulating his mana and collecting purple spiritual vigor. As the master of a palace, he naturally had the star-plucking carriage with him when he traveled. There were also 3 perfected monarchs and 1,000 disciples following him. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. He frowned and looked in a certain direction. After thinking for a moment, he ordered, "Go back." They knew that they were not as powerful as Yuliangism. Afraid that something might happen, they would not be able to rush back to the palace in time. Thus, they paid a huge price to build 3 formations in the land filled with purple aura. Therefore, he returned to the palace in just a moment. He sat down at the main seat. Not long after, Great Imperial Executive Jiang Kan and Supervisor Shang Zhou entered the hall one after another. After greeting each other, they also sat down. Shang Zhou cupped his hands and said seriously, "Palace Master, just now, I sensed that the heaven and earth door has been knocked open by someone. Someone has entered our world. Looking at the direction, it should be within the jurisdiction of Yuliangism. Should the Qi Accumulation Palace send anyone to help?" Yang Chuan glanced at him and asked, "Has the Yuliangism sent a letter of aid?" Shang Tian replied, "No." "Then, have we made an agreement that when one side is attacked, the other side needs help? Shang Zhou replied, not yet. Yang Chuan asked coldly, then why do you want to save him? Shang Zhou nodded and cupped his hands. He then sat down and did not ask any more. Jiang Kan opened his mouth and said, just now, when I came, I received news that the formations to and from Yuliangism have all been cut off. There must be an external enemy coming to kill us. Moreover, they should have planned for a long time before they could do this. Currently, among the enemies that we know of in Junchen realm, only the cultivators of the 9 continents have such ability. Therefore, it is very likely that the one who came is this person. Yang Chuan stared over and said, then, what does junior apprentice brother think we should do? Jiang Kan said coldly, I think that we should kill the external enemy first before discussing the matter between the two sides. However, here, he laughed coldly and met Yang Chuan's gaze without avoiding it. He said, as long as it is senior apprentice brother's decision, no matter whether it is right or wrong, I will definitely follow it. Yang Chuan waved his sleeve and said indifferently, if that is the case, then let us discuss it later. Just now, when Zhang Yan came out of Heaven and Earth Pass, he felt a majestic presence on Earth's star. His eyes could not help but flash. In their previous plan, because it was very difficult for Sima Quan to get close to where Gu Tsongrong was, they planned to take the initiative to find him after they entered the realm. There were many variables in doing this, but there was no better way than this. However, they did not expect that this person was almost within their reach. It could be said to be a pleasant surprise. Without hesitation, they turned into a ray of light and headed over with Yu Xianshao. Gu Tsongrong saw the 2 rays of light coming towards him, but he stood still and did not retreat. He was confident in his magical powers, and this was the heart of Yuliangism. Even if he could not defeat the enemy, he could still delay until the other perfected monarchs of the sect arrived. However, he did not know that just now, not only had the formation path in Chenzhou heavenly region been destroyed, but the other formation paths had also been destroyed. No one would be able to rush over in a short period of time. Sima Quan had activated the sword ball just now after the gate of heaven and earth was torn open. This caused him to make the wrong judgment. He thought that it was the work of an outsider just now. After all, the formation path had been destroyed in a breath. Apart from the emperor, no one had such magical powers. However, after a few breaths, the 2 rays of light stopped not far away. Then, they spread out and 2 Taoists walked out. Gu Tsongrong looked over and saw that the one on the left was dressed in a black robe with large sleeves. He looked very handsome and was surrounded by Xian Qi. There was a 5-colored light rotating behind him. He could not see what kind of technique he was using, but he gave off an invisible pressure. This feeling was somewhat similar to when he was standing in front of Kong Ying. The one on the right was a Taoist cultivator in his 30s. His eyes were bright and clear, and he stood on a ray of light. There were countless silver stars swirling around him, and the sound of swords seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. At this moment, this person's gaze was directed at him, and he felt an extremely sharp light shining on him. He could not help but want to retreat and dodge. He took a breath and suppressed the waves of emotions in his heart. He bowed solemnly and said, where did you 2 come from, fellow Taoists? Zhang Yan smiled and bowed as well. He said, are you the prosperous emperor of Yuliangism? We are both Taoists from the 9 continents. We know that your sect intends to attack our world, so we have come to put an end to this calamity. Cultivators from the 9 continents? Gu Tsongrong's heart shook. He knew that things were not good, but he remained calm on the surface. He asked, put an end to this calamity. What do you 2 want to do? As he spoke, he secretly tried to communicate with Kong Ying so that he could spread the news. However, when he tried, he realized that it was useless. He immediately knew that these 2 people must have played some tricks. Yu Xianshao stood calmly at the side. To a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, there was no distance between them. As long as they were within a world, they would not be restricted by any distance. However, this was not impossible to deal with. The Shaoqing sect had a technique that could eliminate divine intents. Since they had come here, how could they let the other party do as they pleased? Of course, if they could calm their minds and control their techniques, they could think of a way to avoid it. However, it was impossible for them to do so now that they were facing the threat of these two people. Zhang Yan said, "If your sect is willing, we can make an oath to stop fighting and never invade your world again." "What do you think, prosperous emperor?" Gu Tsongrong was silent for a moment, and then he sighed. He could have said that only the sect master could make the decision to buy time. However, he knew that it would be useless. Instead, he would lose his identity. Thus, he said in a deep voice, "This is impossible." Zhang Yan was not annoyed. He nodded and said, "Then only the cultivators of our two worlds can fight it out." Gu Tsongrong cupped his hands and said in a tough manner, "Then I will accept your challenge." Zhang Yan returned the bow and said, "Sorry for the offense." After he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand and made a grabbing motion in front of him. Gu Tsongrong felt that after the hand stretched out, it became bigger and bigger. Soon, it became so big that it covered the sky. Even the entire planet under his feet was covered by it. He could not help but feel that it was difficult to escape. What shocked him was that this was not an illusion, but that the palm had truly grown to such a huge size. At this moment, there were still many cultivators who had not left the planet. When they looked up, they realized that their field of vision was occupied by this huge hand. When everyone saw this scene, they were extremely shocked. Gu Tsongrong made a hand seal, and his body flashed slightly. In the blink of an eye, a boundless light bloomed. It was as if endless power was born in the void, and it kept bombarding the huge hand. This was Yu Yang's magical power, positive and negative vitality extermination. When it was used by a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, it had the power to destroy the stars and collapse the heavens. However, it consumed a lot of magic power. With his current cultivation, even if he used all his strength, he could at most use it 3 to 4 times in a short period of time. However, after a moment, his expression changed. This magical power could not move the huge hand at all. He immediately knew that his opponent was powerful. Just as he was about to use another technique, Yu Xianshao, who was beside him, pointed with his finger, and the sword light came down. This battle was a battle of life and death between the two sides. There was no such thing as not attacking together, and Yu Xianshao would not show mercy because of this. In his opinion, since his opponent chose to stay, it meant that he was prepared to fight 1 against 2. This attack had not yet arrived, but Gu Tsongrong felt a sharp pain in his divine will. He knew that he was in a bad situation, so he did not dare to block it head-on. He immediately used his magic power and activated his root fruit. His whole body seemed to have left this world. Whether it was the Taixian hand or the dazzling sword light, they both passed through his body and did not hurt him at all. However, even though he dodged, the earth star behind him couldn't escape. Under the grasp of the giant hand, it shattered with a loud bang. After that, the sword light also rushed up, and when all the light disappeared, the earth star had already disappeared. It had been forcefully erased from the void. Although Gu Tsongrong had escaped danger, his expression was extremely heavy. He didn't feel that he was out of danger because of this. Although the root fruit could avoid calamity, it wasn't impossible for the cultivators of the same generation to find it. Once someone found his location through the qi, he wouldn't be able to hide anymore. The more he used this method, the easier it would be for others to catch him. If he wasn't forced to, he wouldn't want to do this. Seeing that his opponent's divine ability and cultivation technique were much stronger than his, and the planet beneath him had been destroyed, there was no need for him to stay here. So, he leaped up and wanted to use an escape technique to leave. Zhang Yan smiled, and his eyes flashed. Gu Tsongrong's body could not help but stop for a moment. In just a moment, countless sword lights shot over and immediately tore him into countless fragments of starlight. However, in the next moment, his body reformed again. Mortal metamorphosis cultivators had already transcended their physical bodies and formed their own world. As long as their root fruit was still there, they would not die. If it was not for the fact that Master Lingya was facing the treasure of the Qinsang school, he would not have been killed so easily. However, if he could not neutralize the enemy's technique, it would be difficult for him to escape death sooner or later. Chapter 1401. Just now, Gutsongrong had only just turned his body around when bolts of lightning exploded around him out of nowhere. His Dharmakaya was once again blasted apart. By the time it reassembled, another sword gleam was flying towards him. Greater than over equal to, he understood that the other party had deliberately allowed him to recover his body and then destroyed it again so that he could wear down his chi of vitality. This was because the mana and spiritual vigor consumed by the Dharmakaya was many times more than fighting head-on. He was also extremely shocked, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to hold on for long if this continued. Thus, he didn't dare to take any chances. With a thought, a ray of spiritual light flew out and circled around his body. The lightning sword ray collided with this magical weapon, but it only stirred up rays of golden light, but it didn't break. This treasure's name was the Void Law Starry Robe. It was a defensive magic treasure. Once used, it could separate the inside from the outside and was enough to protect one's body. However, this treasure had one drawback. Once it was used, the owner would also be unable to attack the enemy. Logically speaking, this was an act of binding one's own hands and feet. It was equivalent to allowing others to attack. Even if one could protect oneself for a while, it wouldn't change the outcome. However, it was different for Taoist Master Fan too, because cultivators at this level had more than just divine arts. Apart from avoiding tribulations and moving disasters, they could also use divine will. Once the divine will was activated, one could think of hundreds of things in an instant and come up with a suitable countermeasure. Therefore, as long as the gap between the cultivation of both parties was not too big, one would not lose too badly on the battlefield. However, Gu Songrong knew that both Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao were far superior to him in terms of cultivation and abilities, so he had no chance of winning against them. Thus, he had another idea. He focused his mind and no longer cared about what was happening around him. Instead, he tried to break through the barrier of his divine will. He wanted to communicate with Kong Ying or the other celestial emperors so that he could report the situation to them. Yu Xuanxiao's expression changed slightly. It wasn't difficult for him to sense that the other party's divine will was mysteriously expanding outside. Even though the other party's magic power and divine ability were inferior to his, he couldn't be careless. He had to focus and deal with it. Thus, he said, "Master Zhang, I need to stop him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Leave it to I." With a flick of his finger, countless Qingxian soaring thunder shockwaves exploded on Gu Songrong's body. At the same time, he wielded the Qinghong True Sword, which transformed into thousands of sword lights that slashed at Gu Songrong's body. Under such a ferocious attack, the Void Law Starry Robe was trembling incessantly, and spiritual light was dispersing incessantly as strands of light scattered in all directions. However, this treasure was really sturdy. After this round of attacks, it still wasn't broken. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't increase his attacks and continued to attack the magic treasure. He was not in a hurry to deal with this person. The other emperors of Yuliangism would not be able to arrive in such a short time, so he had plenty of time to deal with the enemy. Furthermore, even if this treasure was broken, it was not as if the other party did not have any other tricks up his sleeves. He did not have to worry about fighting back at all, and he could even exhaust the other party's magic power. At the end of the day, the magic power and spiritual opportunity of a mortal metamorphosis cultivator was endless, and it was not an easy task to take his life. Therefore, the best strategy was to exhaust his vitality. Gu Songrong tried to spread his divine will a few times, but it was blocked time and time again. This was not without a price, and his vitality was also continuously being exhausted. However, he did not give up because of this. He took out a technique, and streams of purple qi immediately spread out and were absorbed into his body by his avatar. In just an instant, his magic power and spiritual opportunity recovered a lot. This was the purple clear spiritual opportunity that he had collected from the void over the years. As long as he refined this qi into his body, no matter how injured he was, he could recover it. With this item, not only could he delay for a longer time, but even if he lost the battle, he would not leave anything to his opponent. This naturally could not be hidden from Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao, and they could not help but sigh. During the battle in the 9 continents, because the spiritual opportunity in the inner realm had long been exhausted, even when the mortal metamorphosis cultivators from both sides fought, they had to be careful and could not use all the power of their divine abilities. They were even afraid that if they were not careful, they would use up the remaining purple clear spiritual opportunity. Seeing how familiar Gu Songrong's movements were, it was obvious that the cultivators from the Great Dust Realm often did this when they fought with their peers. Only the Qi Dao cultivators who came from places with abundant spiritual opportunity could evolve such a tactic, and they had never encountered it before. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he thought to himself, since this person has Zi Qing Lingqi on him, then I can get rid of him. Not only can I avoid a long battle, it won't be difficult for me to recover my losses. After all, Gu Songrong's cultivation was lower than his and Yu Xuanxiao's. If he did not use his magic power, he could kill this person in an extremely short time. Although they also had purple clear spiritual opportunity, the amount was limited, and they had prepared it to deal with Kong Yin. They had no intention of using it on this person. However, seeing that this person seemed to have a lot of purple clear spiritual opportunity, it was worth it for him to use a powerful method. After killing this person, they could have all the purple clear spiritual opportunity. With a thought, the 5-colored light behind him flickered, and a red light flashed through the sky. It brushed past the Void Law's starry robe, and it was wrapped in a revolving red flame. The arcane treasure was able to withstand the previous few attacks, but the light suddenly trembled and let out a mournful wail. At the same time, Gu Songrong's body trembled, and he was forced out of his meditative state. When he looked again, he was shocked. The spiritual light on the magic treasure was being refined by the scarlet flame. If he ignored it, it would probably turn into nothingness in 10 breaths. He knew that if he only defended and did not attack, the magic treasure would definitely be destroyed by his opponent, but he did not expect it to be so fast. Fortunately, he did have a backup plan. With a shake of his hand, a golden light flashed, and it turned into a flying boat in front of him. He was prepared to use the formation on the boat to avoid the attack. However, before he could enter the boat, he seemed to hear the sound of raging waves. He saw a watercolored brilliance leaping out of thin air. There seemed to be an immeasurable amount of water within it. In just a flash, the big boat was swept away and disappeared. Meanwhile, a wave of piercing pain came from his body. Before he could make any reaction, in the next moment, his entire body was slashed apart by a strand of sword light that soared through the sky, and his Void Law star robe that was already extremely damaged was slashed into pieces as well. However, because he did not use his divine decree, Yu Xianshao was able to free his hand and immediately attacked him. In the void, tens of thousands of stars gathered in the air, and Gu Songrong's Dharma body gathered again. However, in the face of the joint attack of the two people, he had no choice but to use the root fruit again to avoid the sword light, thunder, and fire that came after him. Zhang Yan pointed out with his finger. Lightning flashed in the air, and in an instant, countless bolts of lightning and fire landed around this person. Once he took the root fruit, he would immediately be trapped. Yu Xianshao also raised his hand, and the thousands of sword lights also followed. His gaze was cold. Gu Songrong was only in the first tier of the mortal transformation realm, and his cultivation was not as high as his. However, Gu Songrong used the root fruit twice in front of him, and he could vaguely see where Gu Songrong was. He believed that with another 1 or 2 more times, he would be able to deduce where Gu Songrong was. When that time came, Gu Songrong would not be able to use this technique to avoid the disaster in front of him, and it would be much easier to deal with him. It was not difficult for Gu Songrong to notice this, but he did not persist. He took out a hand seal, and his body suddenly disappeared from his original spot. When he reappeared, he had already landed on an earth star of the Yuliang sect. This technique was not a divine art. It relied on the help of the jade nose, buried under the earth star, and a bit of divine will to borrow the power of the stars to guide him. This was not unique to Yuliangism, but one of the many escape techniques that the cultivators of the Junchen realm had come up with after fighting for tens of thousands of years. As long as the cultivator was under the jurisdiction of the sect, as long as the cultivator had reached the level of a true lord, he could use this technique. Just now, his body had stabilized, and he immediately wanted to take out another flying boat. However, just as he thought about it, he felt a sword light aimed at him from afar. It seemed that if he moved, it would kill him. He could not help but change his expression, and his body flashed, and he escaped to another Earth star. Just a moment after he left, there was a loud bang on the Earth star. Zhang Yan and Yu Xianxiao had also escaped to the Earth star. When they sensed that he had escaped, they disappeared again, and they chased after him by following his aura. However, 3 spiritual masters Fan too had escaped to this place one after another, which caused a huge tsunami and landslide on this Earth star. If the disciples of Yuliangism hadn't evacuated in time after hearing the news, other than true lords, no one would have been able to escape from such a disaster that was comparable to a heavenly tribulation. After Gu Songrong escaped 5 times, he could no longer find an Earth star in front of him that he could borrow strength from. However, he finally found an opportunity to take out a flying boat. When he got into the boat, he immediately activated the restriction formation around him, thinking that he could use this to delay for a while. However, when he tried to contact his fellow Taoists in the sect, he found that he still couldn't break through the barrier that enveloped him. He couldn't help but sigh. The other party actually didn't make the slightest mistake when they were pursuing him. At this moment, the void space cracked, and he felt the vibration behind him. He knew that the other party had caught up again. He hurriedly drove the spiritual boat to escape. Zhang Yan looked over, and when he saw this scene, he smiled and punched forward. In an instant, the void collapsed, and the restriction formation on the flying boat was instantly broken. The spiritual boat could not withstand this force, and it collapsed inch by inch. Gu Songrong was shocked. He did not expect the spiritual boat to be broken so quickly, so he immediately turned into a ray of light and flew out. However, in a hurry, he was a little embarrassed. At this moment, a huge pressure came from his body, which seemed to be able to bind his body. At this moment, there was no other way. Although he had tried his best to avoid using the root fruit, at this critical moment, he could only use it to bind himself. In the next moment, because there was no way out, and under the joint attack of Zhang Yan and Yu Xianxiao, he had no choice but to use the root fruit to repeatedly avoid the divine powers and sword lights. After a few times, Yu Xuanxiao's eyes became fierce, and he said, "Found it." He raised his finger and pointed. Wherever the sword lights reached, Gu Songrong's body had been cut into 2. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Cultivators Fan too could communicate with their divine wills. At this moment, Yu Xianxiao had found the other party's root fruit, which was nothing to him. Therefore, he did not hold back anymore. He waved his sleeve, and countless sword lights swept down like the Milky Way. Chapter 1402. Gu Songrong was besieged by 2 killing swords and had lost the protection of his root fruit. He could not fight back against Zhang Yan and Yu Xianxiao at all, and his primordial qi was rapidly depleted. He had no choice but to take out some protective artifacts, but it was of no use. Even if he still had a protective true artifact with him, it could only delay his defeat for a little longer. Once the root fruit of a mortal metamorphosis cultivator was found by his opponent, he was almost dead. However, it was not impossible to avoid it. He only needed to use his primordial qi to change the location. It was easy to say, but if his opponent could find it once, they could find it again, and it would become easier. In the end, it still depended on the cultivation of both parties. If one reached the 3rd tier of the mortal metamorphosis realm, the root fruit could come and go as it pleased, and it was almost impossible for someone with a weaker cultivation to be found. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that Gu Songrong's Dharmakaya had been destroyed again, and his primordial qi had been greatly weakened. There was no chance for him to turn the tables, so he said, "Fellow Gu, if you are willing to pledge allegiance to the 9 continents and make an oath here, I can protect your life, and I promise not to restrict you after this battle. What do you think, fellow Gu. Sima Quan had done very well before, but he could not really find out any information about the emperors of this realm. The information he had obtained before was also heard from Rao Sanran, and it was only from the Qi accumulation palace, so it was hard to say whether it was accurate or not. Gu Tsongrong was extremely valuable. He was the great protector of Yuliangism, and if he could make him pledge allegiance, not only would he be able to learn the strengths and weaknesses of the emperors, but he might even be able to find out some information about Kong Yin, which would make it even easier to deal with him. Even though he knew the possibility was very small, it did not stop him from giving it a try. Gu Tsongrong did not say a word. From his actions, it seemed that he was still looking for an opportunity and was not willing to give up. Seeing this, Zhang Yan smiled faintly and didn't force the issue. He channeled his mana and suddenly, the sword light grew. Within the light, there were two colors of gold and red. He had infused the 5 elements true light into the killing sword. He had previously obtained some supernatural powers and Daoist techniques from Mount Qingjue from Zhuahang's spell boat. Although they were only used by the junior disciples, he had been able to examine them from the side and advance his Taixian True technique slightly. At this moment, as the sword slashed down, the void suddenly brightened, and the spiritual vigor was released. Half of the spiritual light that Gu Tsongrong's Dharmakaya had produced was destroyed. Then, it was drowned by countless surging sword gleams, and nothing was left. After completely killing this person, he waved his hand and took the cosmos sack. He opened it and found that other than some scattered pills, there was still a lot of purple clear spiritual qi inside, and there was a lot of it. Considering that they would need to use this qi in the near future, he decided to split it equally with Yu Xianxiao. Now that the two of them had maintained their root fruit divine wills and their combat power was still at its peak, and with the support of the purple qi's spiritual qi, they wouldn't be afraid even if their enemies came immediately. This was also because they had planned it thoroughly and the people who did it were also doing their best. Yu Xianxiao said in a deep voice, "This person, the great protector of Yuliangism, should have obtained the proper cultivation method and supernatural power. However, from what I see, it isn't very advanced. If Kong Yin could cultivate to that level with this, it would be very impressive." Zhang Yan nodded. He thought for a while and said, "However, Gu Tsongrong doesn't have the protection of a palace city. He only has some flying boats by his side, which is a little unexpected." At first, he thought that there were many magic boats and palaces in the Junqian world that could be used to fly through the void. Moreover, this person was Kong Yin's assistant and the great protector of Yuliangism. Since he was going to the void to collect qi, he would definitely have the protection of a Dharma carriage. Therefore, he specially prepared the deep water of heavy water and the heavens united divine water forbidden light. At the crucial moment, he could use them to break the restrictive formation. However, he didn't expect that they wouldn't be used this time. In fact, Gu Tsongrong did have a heaven patrolling raft covered with restrictive formations. However, after Yuliangism decided to invade the mountain and sea realm, he sent the palace city to the main heaven of Yuliangism to reconstruct it and increase its combat power. However, he never expected that the cultivators of the 9 continents would attack ahead of time. This battle was actually carried out under the circumstances where he wasn't fully prepared. Rather than saying that he was unlucky, it was more accurate to say that they underestimated the cultivators of the 9 continents. They didn't expect that the cultivators of the 9 continents would attack first. As they spoke, a vortex suddenly appeared at the place where Gu Tsongrong died. It was as if a black hole had appeared out of nowhere. The two's gazes were drawn over, and they saw that the meteorite fragments floating in the void seemed to be pulled by a great force, and as if they had gone crazy, they were all thrown in that direction. After a long time, the heavens and earth trembled, and all of this disappeared. When Yu Xianxiao saw this, he said in a low voice, "One of the elders of the Shaoqing dynasty once said that if we die, all qi will return to nothingness, and the circulation will never end." It seems that this is indeed the case. Although Zhang Yan had killed Guru Lingya, he had done so with the help of the Void Arcane Origin Cave. This was also the first time that he had seen a mortal cultivator die. When he heard Yu Xuanxiao's words, he couldn't help but think about it. At this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He looked over and saw a spell boat approaching from afar. He smiled and said, "It's Taoist Master Sima." When the spell boat arrived in front of them, an unfamiliar Taoist came out and bowed. He said, "Sect Master Yu, Taoist Zhang, Taoist Master Sima greets you." Zhang Yan nodded at him and said, "Taoist Master Sima, you did well this time. If you didn't happen to land near Gutsongrong, I'm afraid we would have to go through a lot of trouble this time, and it wouldn't be as smooth as it is now." Sima Quan said, "Taoist Master, you're too kind. Since I'm a cultivator of the 9 continents, this is what I should do." Yu Xianshao waved his sleeves, and the Junqian Heavenly Domain map appeared in front of him. There were a few red spots on it. He pointed at it and said, "Taoist Master Sima, according to what you said earlier, where are the emperors of Yuliangism? Have there been any changes?" Sima Quan replied, "Before the 2 Taoists came here, Bei Xiangtong, Ming Qingguan, and the others were still collecting qi in the virtual sky. However, I heard that Gong Chang went to the barren heavenly domain to look for the jade pot left behind by Rao Wanren. I don't know if he has returned." Zhang Yan made an "oh" sound and said, "In that case, that Gong Shao might have been found." Sima Quan said, "If he's not dead, it might be possible." Yu Xianshao said, "This person is a great mystic cultivator of the Purple Sun realm, which is similar to us. He won't die so easily, and I might have one more opponent in the future." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That's also a matter for the future. Maybe we'll have some concerns before, but now that the 6 formations have been destroyed, even if they rush here, they won't be able to reach here immediately. As long as we kill the sect master of Yuliangism, Kong Yin, the cultivators of this world will no longer be a threat to us." Yu Xianshao nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. There's no need to think about this now. Only that Kong Yin is the greatest enemy of the 9 continents. According to the plan, after killing Gutsongrong, they would take the initiative to find Kong Yin. As for the other sovereigns of the sect, they didn't plan to deal with them immediately, because even if they all died, they wouldn't be able to change the overall situation. Therefore, they planned to leave them aside for now. If they could kill Kong Yin, it wouldn't be too late to deal with him later." At this moment, Sima Quan took out the Tongtian Gui and said, "The Tongtian Gui that perfected master handed to me is here. Do you want to take it with you on this trip?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and didn't take it. Instead, he tapped on it and calmed the spiritual opportunity in it. Then, he said, "I have one here that can be used to receive the perfected masters. Perfected Master Sima, you can keep it with you for now in case of any accidents." Sima Quan immediately agreed. Seeing that there was nothing else, he left. As for Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao, they adjusted their breathing and waited for their magic power to recover. After they recovered their mana, they headed towards the main heaven region of Yuliangism. As for whether they could find Kong Yin, they didn't need to think too much about it. The place where they broke through the world was the heart of Yuliangism. As the master of Yuliangism, he would definitely pay attention to it. He was probably heading towards this place. If they rushed over now, they would probably encounter him soon. However, this person's mana was profound, so they had to use their full strength. It wasn't very safe for only the 2 of them to go there. Fortunately, sect leader Qin and the others were just following them. They would arrive in 1 or 2 years at most. At that time, they could surround and attack this person. In the depths of the void, there was a Taoist crane crown riding a large ship towards the Chenzhe heavenly region. He looked calm, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. This was Ming Qingguan, a cultivator of Yuliangism. Before he conquered Yuliangism, he was known as Emperor He. After Yuliangism rose to power and spread its techniques everywhere, he knew that he couldn't afford to offend them. To show his weakness, he removed his title and hid in the Wild Heaven region. However, he was still found by Yuliangism and forced to submit. He was different from the other emperors who voluntarily submitted. He had signed a contract with the sect. If anything happened to the sect, he had to fight. Others could sit back and watch, but he had no choice but to come. The truth was that if Kang Ying destroyed the aura condensation palace, or if he took over the mountain and sea realm, then the threat from the outside realm would be wiped out, and the other emperors in the church would suffer the same fate. Therefore, people like Gong Xiao, Gong Cheng, and Bei Xiangtong all had their own agendas, and were unwilling to contribute to the church. On the other side, Gong Changdao received the news as well. He read the report and said in surprise, "All 6 formations have been destroyed. It seems that the enemies from beyond the heavens have made arrangements. They even landed in the Chenzhou heavenly region. Judging by how well prepared they are, they must have known about our situation. Protector Gu is in trouble." A disciple said, "Is Lord going to help?" Gong Chang said, "Yes. I am also a protector of the sect, so I should help. However, I haven't received any orders from the sect. Besides, who knows what the invaders have set up? If I leave without permission, I will fall into their trap. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? No orders have been sent. It's up to us whether we help or not." If one were to ask about his personal motives, he would not go. Moreover, up until now, there had been no movement from the Qi accumulation palace. No one could tell what they were thinking. To prevent others from taking advantage of the situation, he decided to stay put and not make a move. The disciple said, "Lord, you are right. But what if?" Gong Chang glanced at him and said, "Are you afraid that the sect leader will blame you later?" Without waiting for the disciple to speak, he waved his hand and said, "As long as the Qi accumulation palace is not destroyed and the green sky realm is not pacified, the sect leader will still have use for us. He won't do anything to us. Besides, if I am not wrong, even if I rush there now, it will be too late by the time I get there." Chapter 1403. In the void of the Junqian world, a palace was flying towards the main heaven of Yuliangism. Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao sat cross-legged in the palace with their eyes closed. There were strands of purple energy circling around them. Though flying with the sword escape technique was extremely fast, it also consumed a lot of spiritual energy. Therefore, every once in a while, they would release the palace to recover their spiritual energy. At this moment, there were hundreds of small people around a meter tall moving about in the palace, the outer palace walls, and even the top of the palace. They were repairing the restrictions and improving the formations everywhere. As they worked hard, the speed at which the palace flew was increasing rapidly. These little people were called attendants in the Jade Liang sect. They looked similar to ordinary people on the outside, but their bodies were actually constructed from precious materials, whereas their souls came from living people, and they were just restrained by a secret technique within them. Yuliangism naturally wouldn't do this to their own people. These people were all from hostile forces and were all first-class formation masters. Normally, they were responsible for setting up various formations and restrictions for Yuliangism. If they did well, they could be released and reincarnated. If they didn't, they could only continue to stay in this cold stone body until the day their souls dissipated. This time, they were originally ordered by the sect to go to the void to try to rebuild the formation, but they didn't expect to run into Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao. Because they saw that they were quite useful, the two of them decided to let them stay. The two of them quickly finished adjusting their breathing. Zhang Yan turned to look outside and said, "If this speed could be a little faster, we wouldn't need to use flying swords to cross the sky." On the other hand, Yu Xianshao stared at the universal map of the Jade Liang sect before him. This was something he'd obtained when he captured these attendants, and it wasn't much different from the map that Sima Quan offered. However, this map had a benefit. No matter where they moved, the map would always emit a light that illuminated their current location. He said, "Based on my current speed, it will take me at least 3 years to reach the heaven domain of Cult Master Yuliang. Once I reach there, if Kang Ying still hasn't arrived, I only need to make some noise and he will definitely come looking for me." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "If everything goes smoothly, the sect master and Ingui should have arrived by then." Yu Xianshao said, "This is an extremely good opportunity to kill this person. If we miss this opportunity or allow him to converge with the other imperial monarchs of the sect, then it would be difficult to deal with him. Zhang Yan nodded. He pondered for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Yu, I have a question that I would like to ask." Yu Xianshao smiled and said, "Please speak, Master Zhang." Zhang Yan said, "According to the Taoist book, for us cultivators to enter the third stage, we need to evolve our roots and fruits, severing the past and future. But the past is the past, and the moment is the future. How do we sever it, or how do we sever it?" The Qinsang school's cultivation method was also recorded even after the mortal transformation. It was just that in the 9 continents, most cultivators ascended after reaching this stage. Therefore, only the secret method was left behind, unlike the previous annotated records. Without these as a reference, he could only explore and comprehend it on his own, or ask for advice from those who went one step ahead of him. Yu Xianshao thought for a moment and said, "I haven't reached the third stage, so it's difficult for me to know what the upper stage looks like. But I can tell you my own understanding. Once a cultivator enters the mortal transformation, he transcends the world and becomes a world of his own. In fact, he has already severed the past. It's just that the roots and fruits haven't bloomed yet, so it's incomplete. Only when one's cultivation deepens and avoids the past can one be considered to have reached the second stage. The past me is actually just the present me. It's not that it doesn't move, but it also doesn't change. The stronger I am now, the stronger I was in the past." Speaking of this, he smiled and said, "It's hard to describe the wonders of it with words. Jinren Zhang, why don't you try to slash me with your sword?" Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony and apologized. With a thought, a sword light immediately fell. However, Yu Xianshao didn't move at all. He didn't seem to use his cultivation method, nor did he see any change in his mana and spiritual opportunity. The light just passed through his body. It was somewhat similar to Gu Songrong's sacrifice of the roots and fruits, but there was a big difference. Yu Xianshao said, "Just now, Jinren's sword was taken away by my past me. When Gu Songrong fought with us, because I had already entered the second stage, I always severed the past. So, I didn't have to deliberately hold on to the roots and fruits. Even if he attacked me, he wouldn't be able to hurt me at all, unless he could calculate the location of my roots and fruits. However, if I didn't hold on to them and didn't reveal my roots, how could he find them?" Zhang Yan nodded his head. It was the same as what he had thought before. In this state, those with profound cultivation would have a huge advantage. There were many mysterious changes involved. It was not something that could be determined by just looking at one's mana and excrement. Ordinary cultivators didn't really sever the past. Otherwise, the thoughts of the past, the actions of the past, and the cultivation method of the past would all disappear. Without the past, there wouldn't be the present. Therefore, the cultivators of this generation only used the present to avoid the karma of the past. If they advanced to the next stage, they could avoid the extreme changes in the future. If the evolution of roots and fruits could be completed to this stage, they would have reached the peak of this stage. Now, it seemed that Kong Ying was such a person. This meant that those whose cultivation level was lower than his would not be able to fall on him no matter what kind of magical power one used. Yu Xianshao pondered and said, "I'm guessing that Kong Ying either had some kind of powerful magic treasure in his hands, or he had an unexpected opportunity that allowed him to see through this stage." Zhang Yan also agreed. There was no such thing as a reason in the world. There must be a reason behind Kong Ying's cultivation level. But no matter what, as long as he had reached this stage, everything in the past was no longer important. The main palace of Yuliangism was originally located in the Zhongtian region. The patrolling protector Jiang Zhan's expression was extremely ugly at the moment. Although the array formation in the sect had been destroyed, there were still other ways to communicate with each other. Not long ago, he received news from the Chenzhe heavenly region that there were powerful figures from beyond the heavens invading Junchen. The great protector Gu Songrong covered the retreat of the disciples, and there was no news of him after that. It was likely that he had been defeated and killed. After those powerful figures killed Gu Songrong, it was very likely that they were heading towards the main heaven of Yuliangism. At the moment, there were 11 perfected cultivators guarding the main palace. In other places, this might be an extremely powerful deterrent force. But in front of an imperial emperor, they were useless. They could be erased with a wave of their hand. Jiang Zhan was also frightened. How could he resist such powerful figures? After thinking about it, he felt that he could not make the decision alone, so he invited the other perfected cultivators of the sect to discuss the matter. However, after a round of discussion, some people thought that they could not resist and should retreat immediately. Some thought that they should use the array formation to defend themselves. There were also many who wanted to protect themselves and said that they would listen to the decision of the sect. In the end, no conclusion was reached. Jiang Zhan sighed and said, "We can't retreat, but we can't defend either. Why don't we ask the clone of the sect leader to come out and take charge of the situation? What do you think, perfected cultivators?" When the crowd heard those words, they came to a sudden realization. So that was what this person was planning. Although the real body of the sect leader, Kang Ying, was not here, he had a clone left in the palace. If the sect was in danger, he could be summoned. However, as a perfected cultivator, he did not have the right to do this. In particular, the rules of Yuliangism were strict and could not be violated. However, the rules were not set in stone. If all the guardians of the sect agreed, they could bypass this restriction. The people were not stupid. They knew that if they objected, they would have to find a way to solve the current situation. So, they all agreed and used the guardian seal on the jade talisman. After Jiang Zhan received the jade talisman, he hurriedly went to the main hall where the worship hall was. After placing the talisman on the table, after a long time, light and shadow floated on the stage and slowly gathered into a human figure. He didn't dare to raise his head and only waited with his body bowed. After a while, a voice came down from above. "True Sovereign Jiang, is there something in the cult?" Jiang Zhan immediately reported the news from the Chenzhou heavenly region. Although Kang Ying's clone could not communicate with the real body, it did not hinder him from making a decision. After thinking for a while, he said, "I understand. I have a way to deal with it. You may leave. Just comfort the people." Jiang Zhan did not dare to ask any more questions and left respectfully. Kang Ying's clone raised his hand and took out an item. Then, with a sway of his body, he appeared in the depths of the Earth star. There was also a huge palace built here. After the rise of Yuliangism, it attacked everywhere. There were some emperors who were in charge, but they were all defeated by Kang Ying. 2 of them were imprisoned here. They did not say that they wanted to surrender, nor did they say that they were against Yuliangism. They only thought that this sect would not last long. So, they waited in silence, thinking that they would see that day. Kang Ying had no intention of killing them. Instead, he followed their wishes and let them wait. In a sense, this could be considered another battle. The 2 Taoists were like statues, sitting motionless. Only when they sensed him entering did they look over. Kang Ying's avatar looked at the 2 of them and went straight to the point. "The Jade Liang Order is under attack by a powerful enemy. My real body is still outside the heaven realm and can't make it back in time, so I need the help of the 2 of you. If you agree, after this battle, I will return your freedom to you." One of the Taoists with an old face sneered, "Since we are the enemies of Yuliangism, why should we help you?" Kang Ying's avatar said, "The one who has come will not be able to destroy Yuliang cult. Both of you should know that even if the main heaven is destroyed, as long as my true body remains, I can rebuild it. I just don't want to lose too many followers." The other Taoist spoke, "Taoist fan, he is right. With him here, Yuliangism will exist. Even if this place is destroyed, it will not be a big loss to him." Sung Daoren said, "This time, the enemy is not simple." Kang Ying's clone said, "If it was easy to deal with, I wouldn't need to call the 2 of you, and I wouldn't need you 2 to fight to the death. You only need to delay me until my real body returns." The 2 discussed for a long time. Finally, Sung Daoren said, "If that's the case, we can agree." Kong tossed down the contract he brought with him and waited for the two of them to make their vows. He then took it back and said, "The instruments that the two of you used earlier are all in my Jade Beam Treasure Pavilion. You can take them back later. In Tianyu, there are still plenty of purple pure spiritual vigor that the sect collected." The two Taoists heard this and their expressions changed. Although they agreed to this, they were still a little reluctant. But if they could get the pure purple lingqi as compensation, it would not be so hard to accept. Chapter 1404. As the days passed by in the palace, Zhang Yan decided to take advantage of this period of time to improve his combat strength. After a brief discussion with Yu Xianshao, Zhang Yan went into seclusion in the side hall to cultivate in seclusion. Because the purple pure Reiki was extremely useful in battle, and he had just reached mortal metamorphosis, it was impossible for his current cultivation to improve too much in a short period of time. Therefore, this time he was prepared to put all his energy into the stone jade coral. The stone jade coral contained the secret art of Mount Qingjue, which could guide the qi and help the disciples of the Mount Qingjue. When he was in the grotto heaven realm, he couldn't see the stone jade coral. Now that he had the secret art, he could give it a try. Mount Qingjue had a deep relationship with the ancient Taishian sect. If he could get his hands on the secret art, he would be able to push his Taishian true art to the next level. After releasing the stone jade coral, he pointed his finger at it and sent his mana into it. However, he found that it was blocked outside. As expected, there was a divine will hidden inside. Logically speaking, everyone's divine will was unique. If the divine will from the outside peeped into it, it would immediately be rejected. If he forced his way in, he could destroy the divine will, but at the same time, he would also destroy the treasure. However, since he had his eyes on the stone jade coral for a long time, he had a solution. Perhaps it was because of the ancient devil sect's cultivation method, the divine will refined from the sixth revolution of the strength path was different from the rest. Like the body, it could change into a myriad of forms. As long as he imitated it, it would be as if the divine will came from the same source, making it much easier to deal with. He changed the divine will to roughly resemble the owner of the divine will. He successfully entered the stone jade coral and gradually dissolved it. The process was very smooth. If the original owner of the jade coral was still here, it would have been difficult for him to succeed, but at this moment, no one came to stop him. After a month, the strand of divine will was finally removed. At this time, everything inside the stone jade coral was open to him. He used his divine will to take a look inside. Just as he had expected, there was a secret method of circulating one's energy and practicing one's martial arts hidden inside. However, those who did not know about it would not be able to understand the fundamentals of it, let alone get a glimpse of Mount Qingjue's dermic access. Fortunately, he had learned the 9 numbers mantra, so as long as he was willing to put in the effort, it would not be difficult for him to deduce it. Taking advantage of this free time, he reached into his sleeve and grabbed the broken jade. Then, he sank his consciousness into it. In the blink of an eye, more than 100 days later, he retreated, but his eyes were shining brightly. This cultivation method had greatly inspired him, but if he wanted to use it to perfect the great mystery true technique, it was not something that could be accomplished in a day. It would take at least 100 years. He thought to himself, even though it's hard to complete the technique in a hurry, it's not like I don't have any gains. That Taishian formless true gang of heavens seems to be very powerful. As long as I make some more deductions, it will become my unique supernatural power. He had already seen the secret of this supernatural power, but it could only be practiced by Mount Qingjue. Now that he had both of them, he could use the help of the 9 numbers mantra to deduce a supernatural power for his own use. Since he had nothing else to do, he once again immersed his mind into the remnant of the jade. In less than 10 days, he deduced a divine ability and practiced it for a few more days. He flicked his finger and an invisible magical power was sent out. Wherever it passed, all the meteorites and gravel turned into nothingness without a sound. Not only that, the scattered dust in the surroundings seemed to be attracted by the invisible force and gathered in one place before disappearing altogether. This scene was somewhat similar to what happened after Jinren Fan Tu's death. He nodded subconsciously. This technique is similar to the formless true gang, but it's not much weaker. Moreover, it's more compatible with my body, so there's still room for improvement in the future. To show that it was different from the previous formless true gang, he named this technique Taishian Pure True Gang of Heavens. In the following days, he continued to try to perfect this supernatural power. Unknowingly, 2 years had passed. One day, when he was practicing the supernatural power, he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw a wave surging in front of him. It gradually condensed into a creature that was half snake and half tortoise. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you're finally here." The black tortoise was originally helped by him. A little spirit from beyond the sky manifested into the world. If he went to another world, it would also follow him. However, this also took time. He stayed in the Junqian world for 2 years before this divine beast could come to this world. After comforting it for a while, he arranged for it to stay in a side hall alone. At this time, they were getting closer to the main heaven of Yuliangism. After traveling for another 2 months, suddenly, the Tongtian Gui that was placed in the hall suddenly flashed with spiritual light, and at the same time, there were waves of tremors between heaven and earth. Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao felt it at the same time. They looked up into the void and saw a crack suddenly being torn open, and 4 rays of light descended. Sect Master Qin, Xue Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ing Chuanxiu had already come to the Junqian world with the guidance of the Tongtian Gui. Zhang Yan and Yu Xianshao came out of the palace and went to greet them. They greeted each other outside, and after a few words, they told them about the situation here in detail. Then, they invited the 4 into the palace. When everyone was seated, Sect Master Qin asked, "Where are we now?" Yu Xianshao said, "We are on the way to the main heaven of Yuliangism." "Fellow Taoist Qin, you came at the right time. In a few months, we should be there." Zhang Yan also said, "Disciple Yu and Sect Master Yu intercepted some people who called themselves Shirdu on the way. These people whose souls were captured were building formations for Yuliangism. From them, we learned that there is a realm outside the main heaven of Yuliangism that contains purple clear spirit qi. Kong Yin was most likely there to collect purple qi. Now that the formation has been destroyed, from the distance, no matter how powerful he is, it will take at least a few years for him to return. If we go there and wait, we will definitely run into him. As for whether Kong Yin would go somewhere else and summon the other imperial emperors of the sect to besiege them, it was possible, but not very likely. More than 70% of the sect's members were in the main heaven of Yuliangism, and most of them were direct descendants. Moreover, most of them were direct descendants, and they were the true foundation of the sect. As the sect master, he definitely couldn't ignore them. Besides, Yuliangism was supported by this person alone. If he couldn't deal with the enemy, it would be useless to find others. Sect Master Qin nodded slightly. At the moment, the great Kuan Gui hadn't arrived yet, so they didn't have a 100% chance of defeating Kong Yin. However, because they had made a lot of preparations before, it was not impossible to fight. If they could drag it out until the great Kun arrived, they would have a higher chance of winning. Looking at the current situation, everything had been going smoothly. They had almost achieved all the goals they had set before. If they still didn't succeed in the end, then it could only be fate. 6 months later, the 9 statesmen finally arrived outside the main heaven of Yuliangism. They found that there were layers of restrictive formations set up here. It was obvious that every planet on the Earth had started circulating the Star Wall Jade Ring. However, they didn't take this seriously. If it wasn't necessary, they wouldn't attack these low-level cultivators. However, at this moment, the Jin sensed 2 powerful auras in the distance. Based on their senses, it wasn't hard to tell that their cultivation wasn't inferior to theirs at all. Xue Dingyuan was surprised. Did spiritual master Sima say that there were imperial emperors guarding this place? Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, Yuliangism has people like Kong Yin. As the strongest faction in Junqian world, there's no need for the imperial emperors to hide. I heard that after Yuliangism rose up, it went on expeditions everywhere. Those who were defeated weren't all killed. Some were imprisoned. The person in front might be one of them. Ing Chuanxiu agreed. That makes sense. How could an imperial emperor appear out of thin air? They usually cultivated and traveled. It was impossible for them to not show up at all. There was no need for them to do so. Because it was very easy to find out, Sima Quan couldn't have missed it. Since these two people hadn't appeared before, the truth might be as Zhang Yan had deduced. In front of Yuliang Earth Star, there were two Taoists standing in front. They were Daoist Fan and Daoist Dong, who had an agreement with Kong Yin's incarnation. Daoren Fan sensed that there were 7 powerful auras in the palace. He couldn't help but change his expression. He tried to send his spirit out but found that it was useless. He knew that he was being suppressed by the opponent. He smiled bitterly at Daoist Dong. Fellow Daoist, the person coming is too powerful. It seems that we can only use that method. Daoist Dong sighed. That's the only way. According to their original plan, if the person coming was not strong, they could deal with him easily. However, if the other party was too powerful, they could only negotiate with them and try their best to delay until Kong Yin arrived. Not long after, the palace gradually closed in. Daoren Fan came up and cupped his hands. I am Fan Hongchen. Fellow Daoist, can you show yourself? The 9-continent Taoists saw that the two did not have any intention to fight. After a short discussion, Zhang Yan and Xue Dingyuan came out of the hall and stood in front of the two. Daoren Fan cupped his hands and said, Greetings, fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan and Xue Dingyuan also returned the greeting. The latter asked, You two are blocking my way. Do you have any advice for me? Daoren Fan replied, We wouldn't dare. To be honest, fellow Daoist Dong and I are Yuliangism's prisoners. Now that the sect leader of Yuliangism, Kong Yin, is not here, he is willing to block you in exchange for our freedom. However, we are not willing to risk our lives for him. If you are willing to wait here, when this person returns, we will no longer be restrained. We are willing to besiege this person with all of you. Daoist Dong also said, Indeed, the two of us have a grudge against Kong Yin. This time, he wanted to use us, so he released me and fellow Daoist Fan. If there is a chance, we would also like to kill this person. Zhang Yan smiled and said, This is Kong Yin's plan. Xue Dingyuan also nodded. Kong Yin had probably already guessed what the two were thinking. However, he did not care what method they used. As long as they could delay him until he returned, Kong Yin would be willing to surrender to the enemy. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, Even though the two of you are right, we can't reveal the truth of our situation right now. Therefore, I need to place some restrictions on the two of you. I wonder if the two of you will agree. Chapter 1405. Zhang Yan thought that Fan and Dong's idea was not bad, but it was not enough to gain their trust. If they were careless, the two of them could pass on the news to Kong Yin through the divine will. Right now, the greatest advantage of the 9 continents was that this person knew nothing about them, so they had to restrict him. Daoren Fan sighed and said, Due to the restrictions of the contract, Kong Yin needs us to report what happens here to him at all times. Please forgive us for not being able to agree to this. Daoist Dong then said, Although I can't agree to it, if we are forced by the opponent and can't use the divine will to pass on the news, then it will not be our fault. Zhang Yan smiled. These two had a good plan. If the cultivators of the 9 continents wanted to restrict them, they would have to fight with the real and the fake. Even if they could not win, they would not have to worry about their lives. However, these two still had some value. Putting aside their combat strength, at least they had fought with Kong Yin before, so they could more or less learn some of his methods from them. Xue Dingyuan cupped his hands and said, Fellow Taoists, since you intend to join forces with me, a battle like this would harm our relationship. Why don't we do this? I'll demonstrate a technique, and if the two of you are able to break it, then we can retreat. In this way, the two of you won't be considered to have broken your oath. As he spoke, he waved his sleeves, and an obscure cloud appeared in front of him. Fan and Dong looked at each other. The Junchin realm demon sect was weak, and there were very few people who cultivated this way. The only one who became an imperial emperor, Rao Sanren, could only rely on other factions for protection. Thus, this was the first time they had seen a theurgy like the Mirage Domain, and they could not guess what was waiting for them inside. Seeing their hesitation, Xue Dingyuan said, "Don't worry, I can swear here and now that I will not hurt the two of you." Hearing him say this, Fan and Dong were still a little worried, but the difference in strength between the two sides was too great, and there was no chance of winning. If they did not agree, the other party would not be as kind as he was just now. So, they allowed the cloud to roll up their bodies, silently agreeing. After a while, the two of them disappeared. As Xue Dingyuan watched the two of them enter, he knew that the matter was halfway done. His Void Reverie Mirage realm possessed the ultimate treasure of the Origin Mirage sect, the Grand Spirit Tablet Heart Manifestation, to suppress it. Once an enemy from the outside entered, then even if it was someone with a higher cultivation than him, it would be impossible for the enemy to leave easily. The most difficult thing before this was instead to lure the enemy in as bait. Zhang Yan then asked, "I wonder if sect leader Xue can change people's hearts in the fantasy zone?" Xue Dingyuan did not shy away from this topic. Instead, he smiled and said, "This Xue's fantasy field is used to kill gods and seize wills. Although I can't make these two completely loyal to me, when I fight with Kong Yin later, I can make sure that he won't hold back." Zhang Yan responded with an, "Oh," and nodded his head. At this moment, he suddenly felt the dual realms dial move, so he took it out to take a look. After a while, his expression turned serious and he said to Zhu Zhenyan, "Sage Sima has sent news that Ming Qingguan of Yuliangism is coming from my place." Yu Xianshao raised his eyebrows. He waved his sleeve and unfurled the heavenly territory map in front of everyone. He glanced at it and said, "Looking at this map, the heavenly territory that Ming Qingguan occupies is not far from here. At the latest, he will arrive in a few months. It seems that we have to deal with this person before Kong Yin arrives." Ing Chuanqiu cupped his hands and said, "This disciple is willing to go with you." Sect leader Qin said, "Rumor has it that this person is only in the first stage, but we cannot underestimate him. It is not safe to go alone." Meng Zhen came out and bowed. He said, "Master, this disciple is willing to go." Sect leader Qin said, "Very well. The two of you should be careful. Also, remember to suppress this person's divine will as much as possible. Otherwise, if he colludes with Kong Yin, it is very likely that he will see through you." Ing Chuanqiu and Meng Zhida both agreed. Zhang Yan said from the side, "The palace that brought us here has already been modified by those stone trunks. It is extremely fast to travel. Why don't the two of you take it?" Ing Chuanqiu and Meng Zhida didn't decline. After bidding farewell to everyone, they leaped into the palace and drove the carriage in the direction that Ming Qingguan came from. There were more than 100 heavenly territories that Yuliangism occupied. The main heavenly territory was in the middle, while the rest of the heavenly territories were distributed on the two sides. If the left and right sides were divided according to the map, the overall situation was that the right side was stronger and the left side was weaker. Gong Chang, Gong Xiao, and even Gu Songrong were guarding the right heavenly territory. The left heavenly territory was guarded by Bei Xiangtong and Ming Qingguan. Ming Qingguan was someone who had recently surrendered to Yuliangism. Thus, before this, only Bei Xiangtong was stationed there. This was because almost all the forces in this direction had been killed by Yuliangism, so there wasn't much of a threat. The reason why Ming Qingguan's trip was so fast was because after signing the contract, he became Kong Yin's most trustworthy person other than Gu Songrong. He had been guarding near the main heavenly territory. He originally wanted to go to Qinzhou heavenly territory, but he knew that now that 3 years had passed, the outcome of the battle should have been decided. It was too late to go there. Fortunately, he had to pass through the main heavenly territory to get there. He decided that after he arrived there, he would check the news from all directions before deciding what to do next. Dozens of days later, he suddenly sensed something and exclaimed in surprise. He stood up from the praying mat and walked a few steps forward. He looked forward and saw a palatial carriage coming from afar. There were two majestic auras on it that he had never seen before. One was vast and serene, the other was incomparably sharp. But looking at the cultivation level, it was not higher than his. His expression was full of caution. He thought, these two must be the cultivators from beyond the heavens who broke through the world this time. They look like they are the same as me, cultivators of Qi. Although the other side had the advantage in numbers, he did not retreat. He took the initiative to go forward and then guided his spirit will, wanting to communicate with sect master Kong Yin. However, he frowned. He realized that his spirit will was disrupted by an invisible force. Just now his spirit will was being suppressed by the opponent. He couldn't help but think, these two are really careful. However, since I have come here, how can I not be prepared? He was also a person who once oversaw an area. He had cultivated for almost 10,000 years and had fought with many people of the same generation. He was not unfamiliar with this kind of restriction of spirit will. Naturally, he was prepared for it. He immediately took out an item. This item was transparent and bright. It was round and shiny. It was the size of a pigeon's egg. It looked like a pill. When it reached the sky, it turned into wisps of clear qi, which then turned into rain. In the end, it poured into his body through the top of his head. At this moment, his entire qi dynamic was flourishing. The spirit will was a method of communicating with one's mind. There was no tangible talisman that could help it. However, it still relied on the cultivator's own qi of vitality. As long as the cultivator did not hesitate to consume their vitality, the spirit will could become much stronger in an instant. He stood there silently for a moment. When the qi dynamic reached its peak, he once again released the spirit will. In the palace, Meng Zhida was getting ready to fight with this person. Ying Chuanqiu, on the other hand, was casting spells and continuously taking away the opponent's spirit will. However, all of a sudden, he felt the opponent's spirit will grow and actually broke through his obstruction. He couldn't help but think that this was not good. He hurriedly used all his qi of vitality to increase his spirit will. He once again suppressed the opponent. Ming Qingguan smiled but did not fight against him. He retracted his spirit will. Although he had only made a breakthrough for a brief moment, it was already sufficient for him. This was because he had already established a connection with sect master Kong Ying in that instant. Although he could no longer release his divine will, it did not stop Kong Ying from communicating with him. Given his cultivation, not just anyone could suppress him. Sure enough, after a short while, he felt like he was in a trance, but his spirit had already arrived in an unpredictable space. Seeing a tall and handsome Taoist standing in front of him, he quickly bowed and said, "Greetings, sect leader." Kong Ying said, "You did very well. I already know what happened on your side. You can go up and fight with these two. I will help you from behind." Ming Qingguan quickly said, "I will do my best." Ying Chuanqiu frowned. He could feel that just now, he seemed to have made a mistake. This was not his fault. It was just that after entering mortal shedding, he lacked experience in fighting against his peers. No matter how profound one's cultivation was, if one had never experienced it, it was difficult to make an accurate response when facing an experienced opponent. Even if he had the spirit will to make up for his shortcomings, it could not replace everything. One mistake could ruin the whole situation. However, after this time, he would not make the same mistake again. Meng Zhida saw that the boat in front of him was getting closer. He said in a low voice, "Taoist friend, please hold the line for me. Let me go up and fight this person for a while." Ying Chuanqiu said, "Taoist friend, please go. I will do my best to take away this person's spirit will. However, just now, this person seems to have used a secret technique to break free for a moment. I suspect that something has changed. Taoist friend, you must be careful." Meng Zhida nodded. After leaving the palace, he turned into an endless Milky Way and surged forward with the power to cover the sky. Ming Qingguan did not show any weakness. His body was like a ball of fire, illuminating the sky as he went forward. The two quickly collided. The presence of a mortal shedding cultivator's mana was not something that could be compared to when he was in the grotto heaven. This head-on collision lasted for a few days. Just now, the two of them retreated. Seeing that their mana could not immediately overwhelm their opponent, they each used their supernatural powers and spells in hopes of fighting for a victory here. However, after fighting for a few days, Meng Zhida realized that no matter if it was attacking or defending, at the crucial moment, this person could use a portion of his mana to do something 10%. There were even a few times when Meng Zhida was almost forced to use his root fruit to avoid it. If this happened occasionally, it would be fine. After all, when the spirit will moved, thousands of thoughts could be turned in order to make the correct countermeasure. However, this happened every time. Either the opponent was unusually experienced in fighting, or he did not care about the consumption of the spirit will. However, he could feel that the opponent was not as strong as he imagined. There must be some reason that he did not know. Thinking of Ing Chuanxiu's warning, he did not dare to be careless. He used his spirit will and told sect leader Qin, Yu Xianshao, Zhang Yan, and the others about the various changes in this battle. After sect leader Qin heard it, he pondered for a while and said, "This person responded calmly. His techniques are brilliant, far surpassing his current cultivation level. There must be someone helping him." Even under the suppression of Ing Zhenren's spirit will, he still managed to do so without being noticed. This technique is exceptionally brilliant. It is very likely that this person is the sect leader of Yuliangism, Kang Yin. Speaking to this point, he lowered his voice and said, "When you are dealing with him, you can use all the techniques you usually have. However, remember, do not use your root fruit. Otherwise, this person will definitely predict where you will land. Once you lose your foundation, you will not be able to fight back in front of this person." Chapter 1406. Meng Zhida listened to sect leader Qin's solemn instructions and replied, "I dare not be careless." In reality, he still had many techniques that he had yet to use. However, in a battle between mortal Zhenren, unless one's cultivation completely surpassed the other, the battle would not end in a short amount of time. The battle had only just begun, so he did not move. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Kang Yin's cultivation is profound and his supernatural powers are unpredictable. It is hard to guarantee that Ming Qingguan will not use any brilliant techniques. Since he can help Ming Qingguan, it is possible for sect leader Zhenren and sect leader Yu to help the two Zhenrens." Sect leader Qin said, "Kang Yin's real body is not here yet, but we can try." Yu Xianshao said coldly, "I want to see this person's brilliance." Even though there was a difference in their cultivation, Meng Zhida and Ing Chuanxiu were the direct disciples of the two sect leaders. Their techniques and supernatural powers were of the same origin, so it was easier for them to help each other. On the other hand, Ming Qingguan was completely relying on Kang Yin's profound realm and endless divine will. Although it was easier for him to deal with Kang Yin, he might not be able to use all of his abilities. Meng Zhida bowed and retreated from the divine will. The key to this battle was to avoid using his own root fruit as much as possible. At the same time, he needed to find his opponent's root fruit as much as possible. However, they were exchanging blows, and a normal battle would not be able to force his opponent to do such a thing. Thus, he thought of an idea. He did not hesitate to consume his mana. Everywhere he went, he spread his qi around his body. After the two fought for more than a dozen days, Ming Qingguan felt that his opponent seemed to be much stronger than before. He deduced that the other should also have someone helping him. He used divine will to ask Kang Yin for advice, but all he got was, "Ignore it." He could only raise his spirits and continue to fight with his opponent. After fighting for a few more days, Meng Zhida finally finished setting up. Without any hesitation, he made a hand sign and released the northern underworld true water that he had cultivated for thousands of years. In an instant, the waves surged. Even though it was in the void sky, there was the sound of an ocean sweeping and surging. Ming Qingguan looked and was slightly shocked. All he could see was a torrent of water. The vastness of it could not be described with words. He was extremely cautious, not daring to rashly come into contact with it. He moved through the air, backing up. At the same time, he repeatedly released divine abilities in an attempt to break through the water screen. However, no matter what method he used, as long as it fell into the water, it would all sink without a trace, like throwing a stone into the sea. It was difficult to see any ripples. His heart turned cold, he felt that he was unable to deal with it, so he sent his spirit into the unknown space, cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader, I wonder how Qingguan will break this method." Kang Ying said, "This technique is passed down from generation to generation. With your previous knowledge, you won't be able to break it. You can only escape. If you can't escape, you'll have to use the root fruit to hide." Ming Qingguan was slightly hesitant. "But this way, I'm afraid someone will find my root fruit." Kang Ying calmly said, "Your opponent laid out a trap and you missed the opportunity. This is a loss that you will have to bear. Although I can help you, I can only make up for what you missed. The rest is still up to you." Ming Qingguan didn't dare to say anything more. After his spirit retreated, he leaped into the air, wanting to escape from this boundless water. But he soon realized that the entire void had been filled up by the ocean. No matter how far he traveled, he couldn't leave this body of water. Furthermore, the space that he could dodge was also shrinking. If he still couldn't escape, then it wouldn't take long for him to be drowned in the ocean. He knew that he couldn't hesitate anymore. With the root fruit in his hand, in a split second, it was as if he had jumped into another world. He looked at the water as if it was nothing, then he hurriedly escaped. The moment his root fruit moved, Meng Zhide immediately sensed it. However, he needed to fight with this person, so it was difficult for him to deduce the location of the root fruit. Thus, he transmitted this feeling to the 9 continents true God wills. Zhang Yan was also observing the battle through the spirit's will. At this moment, his expression changed slightly. He could feel that there was an object in an unknown place. It was erratic, as if he could go up and touch it. Immediately, he knew that it was the root fruit and Ming Qingguan's location. After a moment's thought, he tried to deduce the location of the root fruit. Back in the mountain and sea realm, he had sparred with Meng Zhide, Ying Chuanqiu, and the others. However, that was only limited to Taoist techniques and divine abilities. As for the root fruit, it was the foundation of a cultivator, and could not be discovered by anyone other than the cultivator himself. Therefore, he had never done such a thing before. Now that he had encountered a true opponent, he could finally go all out. However, after this round of divination, he couldn't help but feel astonished. During his fight with Gu Songrong, the root fruit had been revealed several times. Just now, Yu Xianshao was able to deduce the location of the root fruit. He had thought that it wouldn't be easy, but after trying it out, he realized that it wasn't that difficult. He had a feeling that as long as he had enough time, even if his opponent didn't reveal his root fruit again, he would still be able to find it. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Yu Xianshao guessed that this might be because he had opened the 12 heavenly barriers. However, as he performed the divination, his spirit's will was rapidly being consumed. He understood that the battle between mortal metamorphosis cultivators depended on who could find the opponent's root fruit first. However, all of this required the support of spirit's will. However, what if I use the remnant of the jade to deduce? Thinking of this, his eyes flickered slightly. He immersed his mind into the remnant of the jade and found that it was feasible. The only slight difference was that no matter how long the spirit's will rotated, only a moment had passed in the outside world. However, the remnant of the jade was different. Even though he was calculating inside, the outside world was still rotating and changing, just a little slower. However, this wasn't a difficult task for him. Not to mention mortal metamorphosis cultivators, even those from the heavens abode could easily use the mind-splitting technique. In just 10 breaths, he had deduced the location of Ming Qingguan's root fruit. However, he didn't immediately inform perfected Meng and perfected Ying. Kang Ying's spirit was communicating with Ming Qingguan at the moment. If the latter lost too quickly, it would very likely raise Kang Ying's vigilance. He used his spirit to look around and found that Meng Zhen had already retreated. At this moment, it was Ying Chuanqiu who was fighting with Ming Qingguan. He immediately understood that the two perfected masters were going to take turns to fight with Ming Qingguan to exhaust his primordial qi. On the battlefield, another 40 days passed. As Ying and Meng Zhen took turns to fight, Ming Qingguan gradually felt that he couldn't take it anymore. While his mana was far from being used up, he couldn't think of a solution. He felt that if this went on, he would eventually lose. Thus, he said with spirit, "Chief, I'm afraid Qingguan is no match for these two." Kang Ying said calmly, "If you feel that you can't take it anymore, I will allow you to retreat." Ming Qingguan was overjoyed. He had a talisman on him that allowed him to fly extremely fast in the void. If he could retreat, then after he went far away, he could slowly recover his primordial qi and wait for Kang Ying to arrive before returning. He dealt with it for a few more hours. Then, he released a ray of green light. His Dharma body closed up, and he turned into a rainbow and flew away. Ying Chuanxiu immediately rode his sword and chased after him. At the same time, he used spirit to communicate to the perfected masters that this person wanted to escape. Meng Zhen said in a low voice, "Do not let this person escape. Otherwise, when I fight with Kang Ying, this person might come out and ruin things." Ying Chuanxiu said, "This person's flying instrument is extremely fast. If I focus on controlling the flying sword, I can catch up. However, once I attack, I will be left behind. It will be difficult to catch up again. At most, I only have 3 chances to attack. If this person is determined, I will not be able to do anything to him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's okay. Ying Zhenren, go ahead and chase. I have already deduced where this person is. Ying Zhenren, go ahead and attack." As they spoke, Ying Chuanxiu had already received Spirit's message. He knew the opponent's location. Without hesitation, he turned into a ray of light and slashed at the ball of green light. Ming Qingguan naturally couldn't stop to block. He was confident that he had only used it once and wasn't afraid of revealing it. Thus, he once again held his ground and attempted to dodge. However, what he didn't expect was that wherever the sword ray passed by, his Dharma body was cut into pieces. In an instant, it collapsed into countless spiritual lights. Ying Chuanxiu wanted to end the battle quickly. He didn't even wait for his Dharma body to reassemble. Thousands of sword rays appeared and continuously killed the scattered spiritual lights. At this moment, Taoist Master Meng also saw the opportunity and no longer besieged him from behind. After the two of them attacked for more than 100 days, they finally exhausted this person's vitality and completely killed him. With Zhang Yan's reminder, the two of them managed to collect the pure purple spiritual vigor that the person was hiding before he died. Then, they drove the palace city back, and after a month, they met up with Zhu Zhen once again. Due to the battle, the cultivators of the 9 continents more or less used up a lot of their spirit. Thus, everyone sat down and meditated so that they could recover their vitality as soon as possible. After a few months, sect leader Qin opened his eyes and looked into the depths of the sky. He said in a low voice, "It's finally here." The Zhu Zhen's expression froze. After being reminded, they could vaguely feel a powerful qi activity coming towards where they were. Zhang Yan's gaze also became deep. Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment, then waved his sleeve to disperse the mirage qi, releasing Fan and Dong. The two had been trapped in the mirage realm for several months, so their expressions were a little absent-minded. But as soon as they came out of the mirage realm, they instantly became sober. The two of them looked around and saw that there were no changes. They couldn't help but feel surprised. Taoist Fan bowed and said, "Taoist Xue, I don't think we have broken this technique. Why did we leave first?" Xue Dingyuan sighed, "Kang Ying is here. The agreement between the two of you should be considered over." "What?" The two of them were shocked and tried to sense it. After a few breaths, their expressions changed at the same time. Taoist Fan took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He said, "That's right. He is here." Xue Dingyuan threw out a contract and said, "Then please sign this contract according to the previous agreement and fight with us against the leader of Yuliangism, Kang Ying." Fan and Dong glanced at each other and nodded. At their level, a promise made was like an oath. They would never go back on it. Thus, they put on a serious expression and wrote their names on the contract. Then, they took out the purple spiritual vigor that they had obtained and handed it to the others. Then, they went to one side to recover their mana. Half a day later, the Zhuzhen's hearts skipped a beat. They raised their heads and saw that in the distant sky, a handsome Taoist dressed in white was stepping on the sky and slowly walking towards them. Chapter 1407. When everyone saw the white-robed Taoist, he was still very far away, but in the next moment, he was already standing in front of everyone. This was not a teleportation technique. It was as if the time it took for this person to arrive had been forcibly erased. Kong Ying looked at everyone. His eyes seemed to be full of emotions, but all of this was happening and then vanishing, and the process kept repeating itself. Following his gaze, the people of the 9 continents were still calm, but Fan and Dong, the 2 sovereign emperors who had been defeated by him, remembered the power of this person and couldn't help but want to retreat. They even had the urge to turn around and leave. However, this didn't mean that they didn't have the ability to fight. Once they entered the battlefield, the 2 of them would immediately cut off their mortal hearts and throw away all emotional restraints. Even if it was life or death, they would let go in only the simplest calculation of gains and losses. In such a situation, cultivators could instead unleash their fighting ability to the fullest. Kong Ying looked around, and when he saw Zhang Yan, he paused for a moment with a look of surprise on his face. He then shifted his gaze to sect leader Qin, who was standing in the middle of the crowd, and asked, "Are you all from the 9 continents?" Sect leader Qin bowed and said, "Yes, do you think this is sect leader Kong?" Kong Ying stood silently for a moment, then raised his hand to return the bow and said, "Since you all have come from the 9 continents, I believe most of the sovereign emperors in the 9 continents are here." Unfortunately, he shook his head slowly, "There are indeed a little too many." Everyone understood that there was no fear in his words. He was not saying that there were too many people who came to attack him, but that there was something else. Xue Dingyuan asked, "What do you mean by this, sect leader Kong?" Kong Ying said seriously, "You all came from the blue sky realm, but I have already seen that realm. For sovereign emperors are enough, any more would disrupt the order of the world." Yu Xianshao raised his eyebrows and said, "The order of the world? I don't know, what is the order of the world?" Kong Ying said slowly, "The world was originally chaotic, until the yin and yang were divided and the 5 elements were arranged. Only then did all things evolve. Only order is the order of the world. Humans are the most intelligent beings in the world. They are born ignorant, and cruel. Later on, they set up a moral code. They know propriety, justice, honesty, and shame. They know how to respect their superiors and inferiors, and they know how to respect and admire others. That's why they are not beasts. We cultivators gather the essence of the universe and consume energy to live forever. However, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is limited. If everyone is like this, then there will be a day when the spiritual energy will be exhausted and the heaven and earth will dry up. There will be an imbalance of yin and yang, the 5 elements will collapse, and there will be a possibility of returning to primal chaos." At this point, he sighed. Taoist cultivators are the poison of heaven and earth. They need to be restrained by rules. Only by establishing order could the universe be peaceful and all living things flourish for a long time. Even though the blue sky realm has a lot of spiritual opportunities, the few of you are able to absorb and exhale the pure and turbid spirits, yet you can't see any joy in them. If this goes on, it will definitely become a calamity. That's why I said that there are too many of you. Yu Xianshao said coldly, "I presume that the person who wants to set the rules is you, Sect Master Kong." Kong Yin calmly replied, "I am not doing this for my own selfish reasons. I am doing this for the sake of heaven and earth, for the sake of humanity." Sect leader Qin said solemnly, "Is this sect leader Kong's Tao?" Kong Yin solemnly said, "It is not my Tao. It is the Tao of all living things, the Tao of heaven and earth." Everyone's expressions varied. Some sneered, Some were indifferent, and there were even some that were indifferent. If an ordinary person was here, then perhaps that person would be convinced. However, which one of the people here hadn't achieved success in their cultivation and found their roots? So, they wouldn't be moved by his words at all. At this moment, Xue Dingyuan suddenly asked, Sect leader Kong, if my world wants to set the rules, then does the Junqin realm want to set the rules as well? Kong Yin nodded and said, of course. The Junqin realm is not as vast as the Blue Sky realm. It is enough to have 3 monarchs. Any more and it will be hard to bear. Xue Dingyuan continued to ask, then what about the extra people? Kong Yin looked at everyone and said, kill. Xue Dingyuan said, then I would like to ask one more question. Who are the 3 people? Kong Yin did not hesitate and said directly, I alone and the Gong brothers are enough. Priest Dong could not help but mock, if that is the case, then if your junior martial brother Gu Songrong is still alive, are you going to kill him too? TSK, he followed you for so many years. Fortunately, he is dead. If he is still alive, I wonder what you would think. Kong Yin calmly said, but he is already dead. Since the result has been decided, he cannot interfere with what we are talking about today. What is the point of mentioning him now? Everyone frowned slightly. What he meant was that if a person died, then everything would die with him. There was no need to think about it. This was considered from the most practical and utilitarian point of view. There was no emotion or humanity mixed in. It was cold and heartless. Even though everyone here was a cultivator, who did not have descendants, disciples, teachers, and friends. Therefore, many people were disgusted. Priest Fan suddenly laughed and said, you are just making it sound good. What do you mean by the heaven and earth? What do you mean by cultivators are the poison of the heaven and earth? He pointed at Kong Yin and said sternly, according to what you said, you are the person with the highest cultivation in the Junqin realm. You are the poison of the heaven and earth. If you are considered by the heaven and earth, why not destroy yourself first? Priest Dong also said, that is right. Even if we really want to set rules, why is it you, Kong Yin, and not others? The 2 of them had been imprisoned for thousands of years. Before the gate of emotions was closed, they looked peaceful on the surface, but in reality, they were extremely resentful. At this moment, they could not help but let it out. Kong Yin calmly replied, I'm establishing order, not creating chaos. There are demons and monsters in this world, and there are billions upon trillions of cultivators. I need someone to protect me. If someone can kill me, then they can. But if someone can kill me, then it is only right and proper for me to kill them. Priest Fan said disdainfully, you make it sound good. If you meet a true young cultivator, you will still have to flee. Kong Yin said, he is strong today, but in the future, I may not be weaker than him. If I destroy him, isn't it more in accordance with the heaven and earth than destroying me? And I am doing all this so that one day, I can eliminate this person. Sect Master Qin nodded slightly and said, I already understand Sect Master Kong's intentions. You're doing all of this for the sake of improving your cultivation, right? Kong Yin's gaze became serious. He looked over and said, may I ask for this friend's name? Sect Master Qin waved his horsetail whisk and said, I Qinsung School's Sect Master, Qin Mabai. So it is Sect Master Qin. Kong Yin's expression turned serious. He said, fellow Taoist, you said that I want to improve my cultivation, and I do not deny that. Even if I stand at the top of this world and restore order to this world, I am but a drop in the ocean when compared to the billions of heavens. I walk this path in order to restore order to the heavens. To do so, I need to have a good cultivation. My Yu-Yang order does not have any superior cultivation methods, but if I can set a rule and kill those who can compete with me in the future, then when the opportunity comes, I will be able to peek into Dao. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He understood this person's explanation. The heaven and earth revolved and evolved into infinite possibilities. In reality, every person, and every living creature, had a chance to achieve Tao. However, Yuliangism's so-called order of heaven and earth was established. As long as this rule was not broken, it could firmly control the threshold of cultivation and even the level of cultivation. At that time, everyone's cultivation would be restricted by this rule. As long as they were under the control of this sect, no one would be able to surpass it. Once he did this, or even succeeded, Kang Ying would be forcefully suppressing everyone else who could reach a higher level, with the exception of himself. In that case, the only one who would be able to succeed would be himself. Zhang Yan was originally a little puzzled as to why Kang Yin, as the sect master, had such strict rules for the ordinary sect members. But now, he understood. These people placed so much importance on this person because he would help them establish an orderly world in the future and then conquer other worlds. At this moment, the heaven and earth trembled slightly. Kang Yin seemed to sense something. He looked into the depths of the void and said, "So there is still a friend who has not arrived. The person I saw outside the world that day must be this person." With such cultivation, no matter how you try to conceal it, it will still cause a great commotion. He turned his gaze again. "I have said enough today. It is fine if everyone has different opinions. It is just that everyone's Tao is different. After this battle, there will be a conclusion." The crowd knew that he was about to make his move. Almost at that moment, everyone's divine wills converged, including Fan and Dong. They all arrived in an indescribable void space. Sect Master Qin said in a low voice, "Kang Yin will definitely use his divine will to suppress us and prevent us from colluding with each other. He is a third-stage cultivator, and it is not wise to fight him head-on. However, no matter how strong he is, he will not be able to suppress us from start to finish. Therefore, Sect Master Yu and I will find the right time to make our move and coordinate with everyone. When the time comes, if everyone can sense it, I hope that you will use your full strength to fight." Although the most important battle force, the Great Kuning Gui, had not arrived, the 9 provinces' sect masters had already discussed a plan. If they were here, they would be here. If they were not, they would have another way to fight. But now, there were 2 more people. After all, they had entered the second stage and had killed a great cultivator in the past. This was also a rare battle force, so it was necessary to explain clearly to them. As Sect Master Qin explained, his voice became softer and softer, until it was almost inaudible. His figure also became blurry, and it was difficult to see him clearly. The sect masters understood that they were already under the pressure of Kang Yin's divine will. They could no longer hold on. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, as if the heavens and earth had shattered. Everyone's divine wills were forced to retreat from this unknown space. Fan Daoist's heart trembled, but he immediately calmed down. However, when he looked up, his heart trembled. Kang Yin was not far in front of him, and besides him, everyone else had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, not only him, but everyone realized that there was no trace of anyone else. They were the only ones left. Zhang Yan stood on the black tortoise's back with his sleeves behind his back. Among the crowd, only he and the divine beast were still together. They were not isolated. He looked into the distance, and Kang Yin was standing there quietly. He could sense everyone's qi, but they seemed to have gone to a faraway place. It was as if they were not in the same space, but no matter where they were, he could still sense Kang Yin's presence. He pondered for a moment. So that's how it is. Is this the change of the past and the future? Just as he expected, everyone here was facing Kang Yin at different times. They might be seeing Kang Yin in the past, or they might be seeing Kang Yin in the future. Every single Kang Yin was real, and they were not just clones of Kang Yin. This meant that everyone would have to face this great enemy alone. Chapter 1408. Daoist Fan could also feel the presence of the rest of the people. At the same time, he knew that if Kang Yin did not withdraw his mana, he would never be able to meet the rest of the people. Now, he could only rely on himself to fight against the leader of Yuliangism. He had been imprisoned for thousands of years, and it was not that he had not thought hard about how to deal with this person's supernatural powers. Now that he had escaped, he knew that he was no match for Kang Yin, but he was confident that he could deal with him. At this moment, he suddenly felt a ray of divine will descend. He remembered what sect leader Qin had said just now, and immediately understood that Kang Yin was trying to break through the obstruction and re-establish the connection. He did not hesitate and immediately activated his spiritual vigor, using all his strength to merge his divine will with it. Boom! With a jolt, he was once again in the unknown void. But when he turned around, he saw that the figures of the people were indistinct and hard to distinguish. He knew that they were still being disturbed by Kang Yin's divine will. At this moment, he heard sect leader Qin's voice, "Dear Zenrens, we are all under the influence of his root fruit. The past and the future can change with just a thought. If there is no one with similar skills to lead the attack, we will definitely not be able to hurt him. Do not think of escaping by a fluke. Just stay on the defensive and wait for fellow Taoist Goe of the 9 continents to arrive, then we can break through this situation." Hearing this, Taoist Fan thought to himself, this almighty person of the 9 continents can make Kang Yin attack in advance. It seems that fellow Taoist Qin's words are not false. Oh, if that's the case, I'd better protect myself first. It won't be too late to make a move after this situation is broken. Not long after sect leader Qin's words, the connection of the divine will was forcefully cut off again. It was obvious that Kang Yin realized something was wrong and used his strength to suppress it again. However, this also proved that sect leader Qin's strategy was very effective. Kang Yin could not maintain such a large consumption of his divine will all the time, so he could only stop him after he realized something. This could not completely block the connection of the people. Even if it was only for a moment, they could still pass some useful information to each other. In some critical moments, it could even be worth a life. After Taoist Fan had an idea, his divine will returned and he hurriedly retreated. Kang Yin, on the other hand, followed at a moderate pace. He did not seem to be moving very fast, but no matter how hard Taoist Fan tried to use his mana, he could not shake him off. Instead, the distance between the two of them grew smaller and smaller. At this moment, Kang Yin's eyes lit up and an object flew out from between his eyebrows. On the surface, it looked like a beautiful piece of jade with the shape of a goose egg. As it flew into the air, it released a warm glow of auspicious clouds. Taoist Fan's expression immediately became a bit unsightly. "Xian Yuli." He gritted his teeth and said, "Fine, fine. I didn't expect you to deal with me first. Last time, I accidentally fell into your hands and was imprisoned by you for thousands of years. Do you really think I'm as easy to deal with as before?" Kang Yin could manipulate the past and the future, but the talismans he had on him could not do so. Among the many bodies of the past and the future, only one of them could wield a talisman, and it could only go where his body was if it willed it. Now that the true treasure was being used here, it undoubtedly meant that Taoist Fan had become his first target. There was a reason why Kang Yin had targeted him first. Fan and Dong had both been imprisoned for thousands of years. Just now, they had not been out for long, and their cultivation was far from recovering. Moreover, because they had fought once before, Kang Yin could be considered familiar with their divine abilities and Dao techniques. Moreover, no matter what, he and Dong Daoist were both second-degree cultivators. Previously, in order to make them come out to buy time, he had given them quite a bit of clear spiritual qi. If they had enough time to refine this qi during the battle, it was extremely likely that they would slowly recover. If he killed them before then, it would be much easier. In the sky, the talisman known as Xian Yuli flashed and suddenly fell down. It left a long tail of light in the sky, incomparably dazzling. However, although it flew out slowly, Taoist Fan did not make any movements to dodge. He only took out a protective talisman that looked like a pair of crossed arms. It was obvious that he was prepared to take it head-on. Xian Yuli was a teaching treasure of Yuliangism. It had the power to throw lightning through the air and explode the stars in the sky. However, the most powerful thing about it was that it could not hit its target. Once it was thrown out, it would be like maggots in the bones. No matter where you went, it would follow you. Dodging everywhere would only waste your mana. In just a moment, the talisman hit Daoist Fan's body. He felt his body tremble, and the talisman that looked like arms was smashed into pieces. This item had not been refined by its owner for thousands of years. Even though Yuliangism had preserved it well, how could it compare to this kind of treasure? With just one hit, it was destroyed. However, he had his past body to guide him, and the talisman blocked most of the attack. This time, he was not injured. Instead, he took the opportunity to release a dermic raft, turned around, and flew into the sky. However, he did not get far. He raised his head and saw a large ruler in the sky. He could not take another step forward. He said hatefully, "Illusory ruler technique." This treasured ruler was personally refined by Kong Ying. It was compatible with his mana. When it was raised in the sky, heaven and earth would become a square inch. No matter how one tried to escape, they would only be able to linger in the vicinity. Back then, he was trapped by this treasure and could not escape. That was why he had no choice but to surrender. The Xian Yuli in the sky swayed and fell down again. This time, it also smashed the talisman into pieces. Daoist Fan grunted, but his Dharmakaya flashed. Under the guidance of Kong Ying's mana, the power of the Dharmakaya was so great that his Dharmakaya could not withstand it completely. When the aftershock reached his Dharmakaya, it almost shattered him. Just as he was about to use his mana again, he felt his body become heavy, as if he was bound by something. He suddenly thought of something and looked up. He saw a ray of light fly out from between Kong Ying's eyebrows, and the sky was filled with light, surrounding him. His expression was very serious. He clenched his teeth and said, "Profound heavy breath." This was Kong Ying's most powerful technique. Even now, he still did not know whether it was a talisman or a divine ability. Its power was unimaginably great. When the breath came, without the protection of a talisman or a suitable divine ability, the avatar would immediately collapse. It would be sucked into the vortex of mana and would not have a chance to reform. In other words, once he was hit, there was almost no chance of victory. He and Daoist Dong both lost to this divine ability and were imprisoned. He deduced that Kong Ying had obtained some kind of opportunity. For thousands of years, he had been thinking hard about how to deal with it, and he finally came up with a few ideas. He sighed and cut off his mortal heart. His expression immediately became expressionless. From this moment on, he would not be moved by anything else. He would only fight his enemy with all his heart. In order to defeat his opponent, sometimes he would not even care about life or death. This was also the reason why he did not immediately do this before. Once he closed the door of emotion, he would only consider things from the most logical point of view. Even he did not know what choice he would make. The ray of spiritual light shrouded him. At this moment, it was as if the entire world had breathed out a breath of air towards him. Daoist Fan immediately knew that after thousands of years, Kong Ying's technique had become even more powerful than before. If he could struggle a little in the past, he could not stop it now. He had no way to stop it. However, there was no fear in his eyes. There was only indifference. At the last moment, he took out a technique and stood still. Then, he was swallowed by a huge amount of air. At the same time, everyone felt that Daoist Fan's aura had suddenly disappeared. This situation meant that he was either dead or was isolated in the void. No matter which one it was not good news. However, against Kong Ying's technique, everyone could only protect themselves. If something happened to this person, they could not save him. Not long after, Daoist Dong's aura also disappeared from everyone's senses. It was obvious that Kong Ying was eliminating his opponents one by one. Everyone's hearts trembled. They did not know who would be the next person to be targeted. In the void, Mengzhen faced the rays of clear light that shot towards him. He raised the overflowing square flag. With a wave of the flag, layers of water surrounded him and blocked all the incoming attacks. With sect leader Qin's reminder, he could only focus on defense when facing Kong Ying's fierce attacks. He had a lot of pure spiritual vigor on him. He could replenish his lost spiritual vigor at any time. As long as he could hold on until the giant Kun arrived, he could break through this situation. After blocking another attack, he suddenly felt the pressure on his surroundings lighten. Slightly surprised, he looked in front of him and saw that a beautiful piece of jade had appeared around Kong Ying's body. It was slowly rising into the sky. His heart sank. He did not see the talisman being used earlier. It was obvious that it was not in his hands at that time. After Daoist Fan and Daoist Dong, it would be his turn next. The beautiful jade talisman swayed and flew down. He waved the flag. Although he managed to block it, his Dharmakaya was shaken and his spiritual vigor could not think. At the same time, a ray of light flew out from between Kong Ying's brows. It shone on him and his Dharmakaya felt heavy. Whether it was his thoughts or his spiritual will, it was difficult to move. He instinctively wanted to hold on to the root and fruit, but he felt that something was wrong. He gave up on the idea and held the flag tightly to protect himself. He allowed the light to reach him. In an instant, his vision darkened and he was sucked into a ball of air. Kong Ying looked at the whirlpool below him. The two talismans that were floating above him gradually disappeared. They were already in the hands of another body of the past and future. Zhang Yan stood on the back of the black tortoise with a calm expression. Kong Ying stood opposite him and looked at him calmly. He did not seem to have any intention of attacking. He knew that the other party had not attacked yet. He must be waiting for something. However, it was meaningless to attack now. Each of them was facing a part of Kong Ying and not all of him. As long as their mana was not at the level where they could cut off the past and the future, they would not be able to hurt the enemy before them. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly, and he looked in a certain direction. Not long after Daoist Master Meng's aura disappeared, Daoist Master Ying's aura also followed suit. In this way, there were already 4 people who had disappeared. However, he did not think that the 4 of them were dead. A normal Jinren was very hard to kill. As long as the essence of the body was not exhausted, then the body was almost indestructible. When Meng and Ning attacked Ming Qingguan earlier, under the situation where the opponent had no power to fight back, they still managed to hold out for more than 100 days. No matter how high Kong Ying's cultivation was, he could not kill 4 people so quickly. However, if there was no one to break the stalemate, then it would be hard to say. However, just as he was pondering, his opponent moved. He raised his hand and a beautiful piece of jade appeared in his palm. Then, it slowly floated up. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Was he looking for him?